The auctioneer's gavel hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Four sisters, the oldest barely 16, stood chained together on a wooden platform in the Kansas dust, their uncle counting money in the shadows while men circled below like vultures over carrion. When the bidding began at $5 per girl, Lydia Marlowe closed her eyes and prayed for death instead. Then a voice erupted from the crowd like thunder splitting stone. $10,000 for all four, right now. Engagement prompt. Welcome to a story of courage, redemption, and four sisters who refuse to be broken. Stay with me until the very end to discover how one impossible moment changed the fate of thousands of children across America. And please, comment below with your city and country so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to that autumn day in 1887 when everything changed. The morning of October 12th, 1887, dawned cold and merciless over Clearwater, Kansas. Lydia Marlowe stood at the cracked window of her uncle's attic, watching the sun bleed red across the horizon, and knew with absolute certainty that this was the day she would lose everything that mattered. Behind her, on the single straw mattress they all shared, her three younger sisters slept fitfully in the pre-dawn chill. Rose, 14, with her delicate pianist's fingers that hadn't touched a keyboard in 6 months. Clara, 12, whose brilliant mind had been forced to abandon schoolbooks for scrubbing floors. And June, barely 8 years old, who still cried for their mother every night when she thought no one could hear. Their mother, their father. Both gone within 3 weeks of each other last spring, father to a logging accident that crushed his chest, mother to the fever that followed her broken heart. And in the chaos of grief, their Uncle Silas had swooped in like a crow on a battlefield, claiming guardianship with papers that smelled of whiskey and lies. "Lydia?" Rose's voice was barely a whisper in the darkness. "Is it today?" Lydia didn't turn from the window. She couldn't let her sisters see the tears she'd been holding back for hours. "Yes. Maybe someone kind will bid for us. Maybe we'll still be together." The hope in Rose's voice was a knife to Lydia's heart. She'd spent 3 months in Silas's custody, 3 months watching him sell off everything their parents had owned: the house, the furniture, her mother's jewelry, her father's tools. And when those ran out, when his debts to the gambling houses and saloons still towered over him like mountains, he'd found one last asset to liquidate: his 4 orphaned nieces. "Get up," Lydia said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her chest. "Get dressed. Whatever happens today, we face it together. We face it like Marlowe's." The girls rose in silence, pulling on the threadbare dresses that were all Silas had allowed them to keep. Lydia helped June with her buttons, her fingers trembling despite her determination to stay strong. When they were ready, they stood in a small circle and held hands, just as their mother had taught them to do before every meal, every challenge, every moment that required courage. "Dear God," Lydia whispered, "if you're listening, please don't let them separate us. Whatever else happens, please let us stay together." "Amen," her sisters echoed. The door burst open without warning. Silas Marlowe stood in the doorway, his clothes reeking of last night's liquor, his bloodshot eyes sweeping over them with the cold calculation of a man appraising livestock. "Clean yourselves up," he ordered. "You look like street urchins. How am I supposed to get good money for you looking like that?" Lydia stepped forward, positioning herself between Silas and her younger sisters. "Uncle, please, don't do this. We can work. All of us. We can pay off your debts if you just give us time." His hand moved faster than she could react. The slap echoed through the small attic room, and Lydia tasted blood from her split lip. Behind her, June whimpered. "You'll do as you're told, girl," Silas snarled. "I've got buyers coming from 3 counties. The auction starts at 10 o'clock sharp, and you 4 are going to smile and curtsy and show those men what good, obedient workers you'll be. Do you understand me?" Lydia met his gaze, her cheek burning, her heart filled with a hatred so pure it frightened her. But she'd learned in these terrible months that defiance only brought more pain, for her and for her sisters. "Yes, Uncle Silas." "Good. Now, get downstairs, all of you." The walk through Clearwater's main street toward the auction square was the longest journey of Lydia's life. People stared from doorways and windows, some with pity in their eyes, others with the blank indifference of those who'd seen too much hardship to be moved by more. The Clearwater Mercantile, where her mother used to buy fabric for their dresses, the schoolhouse where Clara had once been the teacher's prize student, the church where their parents were buried in the small cemetery behind the building. All of it felt like another lifetime, like those happy days had belonged to different girls entirely. The auction square occupied the center of town, a raised wooden platform usually reserved for livestock sales and public announcements. Today, a crowd had already gathered, ranchers in dusty clothes, merchants in pressed suits, drifters and gamblers hoping for entertainment. Lydia felt their eyes on her like hands, assessing, calculating, reducing her and her sisters to their component values. A tall man in a black suit stood beside the platform, smoking a cigar and consulting a leather ledger. This was Virgil Cates, the auctioneer, a man Lydia had seen at church every Sunday of her life, smiling and singing hymns like he wasn't planning to sell children come Monday morning. "Ah, Silas," Cates said, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "Right on time. And these are the Marlowe girls? My. They clean up better than I expected." "Just get on with it," Silas muttered. "I've got debts to pay." Of course, business is business." Cates turned to the girls with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Now, ladies, I need you to stand up on that platform nice and straight. Look presentable. The gentlemen here are going to bid on who gets to take you home, give you work, maybe even adopt you proper if you're lucky. You understand?" Lydia's voice came out stronger than she felt. "We understand that you're selling human beings like cattle." "We understand that perfectly, Mr. Cates," the crowd murmured. Cates's smile tightened. "Spirited. That'll cost you, Silas. Nobody wants a mouthy girl." "She'll learn," Silas said coldly. "Now get them up there." Rough hands pushed them toward the platform. Lydia climbed first, then helped Rose, Clara, and June up beside her. They stood in a line, holding hands so tightly their fingers went white, while the crowd pressed closer. Cates stepped onto the platform, his voice booming across the square. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a rare opportunity. 4 sisters, orphaned but healthy, ages 8 to 16, available for immediate placement. These girls have been raised proper, know their household duties, and come from good Christian stock. Now, I know some of you might be thinking about taking 1 or 2, but Mr. Marlowe here is willing to consider separate bids for each girl, maximizing everyone's opportunity." "No." The word tore from Lydia's throat before she could stop it. "You can't separate us. Please, we're a family." "Quiet," Silas barked from below, "or I'll make you quiet." But Lydia couldn't stop. Terror had broken through her careful control, flooding her veins with desperate courage. "Please, all of you, we're sisters. We only have each other. Whoever takes us, please take us all together." "I said quiet." Silas was climbing onto the platform now, his face purple with rage. "Starting bid is $5 per girl," Cates announced loudly, trying to regain control of the situation. "That's $20 for the lot if someone wants to take them all, though we'll certainly entertain individual bids. I'll give you $6 for the oldest one." A grizzled rancher in the front row raised his hand. "She looks strong enough for field work." "7 for the one with yellow hair." Another man, this one with calculating eyes that made Lydia's skin crawl. "Pretty girls fetch good money in the right establishments." Rose made a sound like a wounded animal. Clara pulled June closer, trying to shield her from the awful reality of what was happening. "We have 6 and 7, gentlemen. Do I hear 8? Remember, these are quality girls, not common laborers. $8 for the little one," a woman's voice this time, sharp and businesslike. "I need help with my millinery shop, and children's hands are best for the fine work." June was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Lydia wanted to scream, to fight, to tear down this entire corrupt world that would do this to children. But what could she do? She was 16 years old, penniless, powerless, watching her family being torn apart bid by bid. "Excellent. We have $8 for the youngest. Now, who'll give me 9 for $10,000? The voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. The entire square fell silent. Even Cates, mid-sentence, simply stopped talking and stared. The crowd parted slowly, reluctantly, and a man stepped forward. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against his dark coat. His hair was the color of weathered oak, shot through with silver at the temples, and his face was all hard angles and harder experiences. But it was his eyes that captured Lydia's attention, gray as a winter storm, burning with something that looked like barely controlled fury. "I'm sorry," Kate stammered. "Did you say $10,000? The man's voice was deep, resonant, absolutely certain. "For all 4 girls. Together. I'll pay cash right now and take them off this platform immediately." The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. Silas pushed forward, his face a mixture of greed and suspicion. "Who the hell are you?" "Beckett Rowan." The name fell into the square like a stone into still water, sending ripples of recognition through the assembly. "I own the Rowan Range, 15 miles northwest of here. Maybe you've heard of it." Oh, Lydia had heard of it. Everyone in 3 counties had heard of the Rowan Range. 20,000 acres of the best grazing land in Kansas, vast herds of cattle, and a ranch house that was practically a fortress. And Beckett Rowan himself was legend, a cattle baron who'd made his fortune in Texas before moving north, a man who'd lost his wife and young daughter to fever 3 years ago and had become a recluse since, running his empire from behind walls, both literal and metaphorical. Silas's eyes had gone wide with avarice. $10,000? For 4 girls? That's what I said. Beckett Rowan's gaze never left the platform, never left the 4 sisters standing there in their threadbare dresses. "Do we have a deal, or do I need to make it 15? "Now hold on," Cates interjected, sensing his commission slipping away. "Mr. Rowan, while we appreciate your generous offer, the purpose of this auction is to ensure these girls are placed in appropriate situations. A single man taking 4 young girls, surely you can understand the town's concern about propriety." "Propriety?" Beckett's laugh was bitter as ashes. "You're selling children in a town square like breeding stock, and you want to lecture me about propriety? I have a ranch with a full household staff, including a housekeeper who's been with me for 20 years. These girls will have beds, food, schooling, and dignity, which is more than they're going to get from any of these vultures circling for cheap labor." He turned to face the crowd, and something in his posture made strong men step back. "Anyone here want to challenge my bid? Anyone want to offer $11,000 for the privilege of tearing these sisters apart? No? Then I suggest we conclude this obscene spectacle right now." Silas was practically salivating. 20,000. The square went dead silent. "What?" Beckett's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You heard me." Silas climbed onto the platform, his whole body vibrating with greedy triumph. "You want all 4? 20,000. Cash. Right now." Lydia's heart sank. $20,000 was a fortune, more money than most people saw in a lifetime. There was no way. Done. The word was simple, flat, final. Beckett Rowan reached inside his coat and pulled out a thick leather wallet. From it, he extracted a bank draft already made out, filled in an amount with a pencil he produced from another pocket, and held it up for all to see. $20,000, payable immediately at Clearwater First National Bank. Virgil, I assume you're authorized to complete this transaction. Cates looked like he might faint. Yes, but Mr. Rowan, are you certain? I'm certain I want these girls off this platform and away from this man before I do something I'll regret. Beckett's eyes fixed on Silas with an intensity that made the older man actually shrink back. "Take the money, Marlowe, before I change my mind and just take them anyway." For a long moment, Silas hesitated, some instinct warning him that accepting this deal might cost him more than just his guardianship. But greed won, as it always did with Silas Marlowe. "Deal. They're yours." Cates fumbled with his gavel, his hands shaking. "Sold. To Beckett Rowan, for $20,000, the 4 Marlowe sisters, sold as a group. Let the record show whatever you want." Beckett strode forward and mounted the platform in one smooth motion. He was even more imposing up close. Not just tall, but powerful, with the kind of weathered strength that came from years of hard work. But when he looked at the 4 sisters, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Girls," he said quietly, his voice pitched only for them, "my name is Beckett Rowan. I just bought you from your uncle, which I realize sounds terrible when I say it out loud, but I want you to understand something right now. I'm not buying slaves. I'm not buying servants. I'm buying you away from a man who would have sold you to people who'd use you up and throw you away. Do you understand the difference?" Lydia found her voice, though it shook. "Why? Why would you do that? Spend that much money on strangers?" For just a moment, something raw and painful flickered across Beckett Rowan's face. "Because 3 years ago I couldn't save my own daughter from dying, but today I can save you 4. Sometimes that's all the reason a man needs." He turned to Silas, and the gentleness vanished like it had never existed. "You get your money, Marlowe, and then you get out of Kansas. Because if I ever see you within 100 miles of these girls again, I'll bury you so deep they'll never find the body. Are we clear?" Silas snatched the bank draft from Cates's trembling hands. "Crystal, they're your problem now, Rowan. Good luck with them." And just like that, Silas Marlowe walked away from his 4 nieces without a backward glance, leaving them standing on an auction platform with a stranger who'd just paid a fortune for their lives. Beckett watched him go, then turned back to the girls. "Come on, let's get you off this platform and out of this town. My wagon's waiting at the mercantile." They descended together, the 4 sisters moving in a tight cluster while Beckett created a barrier between them and the staring crowd. Some people were whispering, speculation, judgment, curiosity about what a man like Beckett Rowan wanted with 4 orphaned girls. Let them whisper. Lydia was beyond caring what anyone thought. At the mercantile, a sturdy wagon waited, pulled by 2 massive draft horses. A Mexican man with silver in his beard stood beside it, his weathered face creasing into a warm smile when he saw them approach. "Jefe," he said to Beckett, "you actually did it. Dios mío." "I did, Carlos. These are the Marlowe sisters, Lydia, Rose, Clara, and June. Girls, this is Carlos Reyes, my foreman and the best hand in 3 states. He'll be driving you to the ranch while I settle accounts at the bank." "Welcome, señoritas." Carlos's English was accented but clear, and his eyes held genuine kindness. "Come, come. We have blankets in the wagon, and Señora Harper has prepared rooms for you. Everything will be okay now. You are safe." Safe. The word sounded foreign to Lydia's ears. They'd been safe once in their parents' house, before the world turned cruel. Could they ever really be safe again? But as Carlos helped them into the wagon and tucked warm wool blankets around them, as Beckett Rowan strode toward the bank with the bearing of a man who'd just won a war rather than spent a fortune, Lydia felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. "Señoritas," Carlos said gently as he climbed onto the driver's bench, "I know you are frightened. I know today has been terrible, but I have worked for Señor Rowan for 15 years, and I tell you this, he is a hard man. Yes, a man of storms, but he is also a good man, a fair man. He will keep you safe. This I promise." The wagon lurched into motion, pulling away from the auction square, away from the staring crowds, away from everything that had just happened. June leaned against Lydia, exhausted from crying. Rose and Clara huddled close on the other side. "Lydia?" June whispered. "What's going to happen to us?" Lydia wrapped her arms around her baby sister and looked back at the town of Clearwater, growing smaller behind them. Somewhere in that town, their parents were buried. Somewhere in those streets, they'd lived their entire lives until 6 months ago. But that life was gone now. Whatever came next would be something entirely different. "I don't know, June," she answered honestly, "but we're together. As long as we're together, we can face anything." The wagon rolled northwest, following a road that cut through endless prairie grass turning gold in the autumn sun. They traveled for over an hour, the town disappearing entirely behind them, replaced by a landscape of rolling hills and distant tree lines. Then, as they crested a particularly high ridge, Carlos pointed ahead. "There. You see? The Rowan Range." Lydia looked, and her breath caught. The ranch spread across a valley like a small kingdom. The main house was enormous, 2 stories of whitewashed wood and stone, with a wraparound porch and real glass windows that caught the afternoon light. Surrounding it were dozens of outbuildings, barns, stables, bunkhouses, workshops. Corrals filled with cattle stretched toward the horizon, and beyond everything, protected by a line of cottonwood trees, She could see orchards and what looked like vegetable gardens. It was more wealth than Lydia had ever seen in one place. And this was where they were going to live? Madre de Dios, Rose breathed. It's like something from a storybook. Si, Carlos agreed, clearly proud. Senor Rowan built all this with his own hands and his own sweat. Everything you see, he made from nothing, and now you will be part of it. As they descended toward the ranch, Lydia saw people emerging from various buildings, ranch hands stopping their work to watch the wagon approach. By the time Carlos pulled up in front of the main house, a small crowd had gathered. And standing on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron, was a woman who looked like someone's grandmother come to life. Round, comfortable, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that radiated warmth. "Well, well," she said, as Carlos helped the girls down from the wagon. "So you're the ones Beckett's been muttering about all week. Come here, children, let me look at you." She descended the porch steps with surprising agility and examined each girl with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen everything life could throw at people. When she got to June, still tear-stained and trembling, her expression softened completely. "Oh, sweetheart, you've had a terrible day, haven't you? Well, that stops right now. I'm Matilda Harper. You can call me Maddie. And I've been managing this house since before most of these cowboys were born. You're going to be just fine here, all of you." "Mrs. Harper," Lydia began. "Maddie," the older woman corrected firmly. "Mrs. Harper was my mother-in-law, God rest her meddling soul. Now, Carlos, take their things." "What things? They don't have any things." "Well, that's the first order of business, then." She turned back to the girls. "You're all half-starved and exhausted. First we'll get some food in you, then baths, then proper beds with real mattresses and clean sheets. Tomorrow we'll worry about clothes and everything else. Today, we just take care of the basics. Sound good?" The kindness in her voice broke something in Lydia's carefully maintained composure. Tears she'd been holding back all day suddenly flooded down her face. Beside her, Rose was crying too, and Clara, and June. "Oh, my darlings!" Maddie gathered all four of them into a surprisingly strong embrace. "Cry all you need to. Get it out. You're safe now. You're home." Home. The word sounded impossible, but as Maddie led them into the ranch house, into a kitchen that smelled of baking bread and simmering stew, into a warmth and safety they hadn't felt in months, Lydia allowed herself to believe it might be true. The kitchen was huge, bigger than the entire downstairs of their parents' house had been. A massive cast-iron stove dominated one wall, with copper pots hanging above it like something from a palace. A long wooden table filled the center, scarred from years of use but scrubbed clean. And everywhere Lydia looked, there was food, bread cooling on racks, vegetables in baskets, preserves lining shelves. "Sit, sit," Maddie ordered, already ladling stew into bowls. "Don't be shy. There's plenty, and you all need it." The girls sat hesitantly, unsure if this was real or some dream they'd wake from to find themselves back in Silas's attic. But when Maddie placed bowls of thick beef stew in front of them, accompanied by slices of bread still warm from the oven, hunger overrode caution. They ate like starving animals because that's essentially what they were. Silas had fed them, barely, but nothing like this. Nothing with meat and vegetables and thick gravy that tasted like heaven itself. Maddie watched them with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. "When did you last have a proper meal?" "Last spring," Lydia answered between bites. Before our parents died." 6 months, Maddie's voice went hard. "That man let you go 6 months on scraps and slop. Well, that ends now. You'll eat 3 meals a day here, plus whatever you need between." Growing girls need proper food. A door opened somewhere in the house, followed by heavy footsteps. Then Beckett Rowan appeared in the kitchen doorway, hat in hand, looking somehow larger inside than he had outside. "They settled?" he asked Maddie. "Eating, as you can see." Maddie fixed him with a look that probably terrified most men. $20,000, Beckett? Have you lost your mind?" "Probably." He moved into the room, taking a seat at the far end of the table. "But I've got $20,000, and they needed saving. Seemed like a fair trade." "Nothing about this is fair, and you know it. Those men at that auction were ready to tear those girls apart like wolves on a carcass. Which is why I stopped it." Beckett's voice carried an edge of finality. It's done, Maddie. They're here now. Question is what happens next. What happens next, Maddie said firmly, is that these girls get care, education, safety, and respect. They're not servants, Beckett. If you brought them here thinking, I brought them here because they needed a home and I have one. He looked at the four sisters, his expression unreadable. But Maddie's right to be clear about expectations. So let me lay things out plainly. You four are not my employees. You're not my wards in the legal sense. I haven't adopted you and don't plan to. What you are is residents of this ranch for as long as you need to be. You'll have rooms, food, clothing, and education. In return, I expect you to contribute to the household as you're able, helping Maddie, learning skills, eventually maybe working with the horses or cattle if you're interested. But you're not prisoners. If you're unhappy here, if you want to leave when you're old enough, you're free to go. Understood? Lydia studied him carefully, trying to see past his gruff exterior to the truth beneath. Why us? Why really? You could have let that auction proceed, saved $20,000, and nothing would have changed for you. Beckett was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window overlooking the ranch. 3 years ago, my daughter Sarah died of scarlet fever. She was 9 years old. My wife went 2 weeks later. Couldn't live without her, I think. Fever took her too, but it was really grief that killed her. The kitchen had gone silent, except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. I was in Texas when it happened, Beckett continued, his voice rough. Doing a cattle deal, making money, building an empire. By the time I got home, they were both already buried. I spent months after that asking myself what any of it mattered. The ranch, the money, the cattle. What good was any of it if I couldn't save the people who mattered most? He turned back to face them. I don't have an answer to that question. But today, when I heard that man trying to auction off 4 sisters like livestock, I thought maybe I could at least save someone else's daughters. Maybe that counts for something, maybe it doesn't, but it's all I've got. June, who'd been quiet throughout dinner, spoke up in a small voice. We had a sister too. She died when she was a baby. Mama said she's in heaven with the angels. Beckett's expression cracked just slightly. Then maybe Sarah has company up there, someone to play with. Mr. Rowan, Rose said hesitantly, you said we'd have education. Do you mean real school? With books and everything? I mean, whatever kind of education you want. Maddie here used to be a school teacher before she came to work for me. And we've got a library upstairs with more books than you could read in 10 years. Plus, if you need more specialized teaching, we can bring in tutors from Topeka or even Kansas City. Clara's eyes had gone wide. Books? How many books? Despite everything, Beckett smiled. Want to see? 5 minutes later, all 4 girls stood in what Beckett called the library, but what looked to them like a cathedral of learning. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, packed with leather-bound volumes, comfortable chairs clustered near a fireplace. And by the window, a globe sat on a stand showing all the countries of the world. Clara made a sound like a whimper and rushed forward, her fingers trailing along the spines of books. Mathematics, science, history, poetry, it's all here. Everything. Take whatever you want, Beckett told them. The books are meant to be read, not just looked at. For the first time since their parents died, Lydia saw her sisters smile. Really, truly smile. Maybe, she thought, just maybe this would work. The rest of that first evening passed in a blur of overwhelming kindness. Maddie showed them to their rooms, actual separate bedrooms, one for each of them, with real beds and clean linens and windows that looked out over the ranch. There was a bathroom with running water and a tub large enough for soaking. There were wardrobes waiting to be filled with clothes they didn't have yet. Tomorrow, Maddie promised, we'll take measurements and I'll start sewing, and we'll send to Topeka for ready-made things to tide you over. But tonight, just rest. You're exhausted, and you've earned sleep in a real bed. As the sun set over the Rowan Range, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the 4 Marlowe sisters gathered in Lydia's room, the largest of the 4, and sat together on the bed. Is this real? June whispered. Or are we going to wake up back in Uncle Silas's attic? It's real, Lydia answered, though part of her wondered the same thing. We're here. We're together, and tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. I already know what comes next, Clara declared, clutching 3 books she'd taken from the library. I'm going to read everything in that room, every single book, and then I'm going to learn mathematics so well that I can calculate exactly how many days it'll be before I never have to think about Uncle Silas again. Rose laughed, the first genuine laugh Lydia had heard from her in months. That's very specific, Clara. I like specific. Specific makes sense. Today didn't make sense. No, Lydia agreed. Today was impossible, but we survived it. We'll survive whatever comes next, too. A soft knock on the door frame made them all turn. Maddie stood there with a tray carrying 4 cups of warm milk and honey. Thought you might need this before sleep, she said. Old family recipe. Helps with the nightmares. As they sipped the sweet, warm milk, Maddie sat on the edge of the bed. I know you're scared. I know everything's uncertain right now. But I want you to understand something about Beckett Rowan. He's not an easy man. He's hard, sometimes cruel in his honesty, and he carries grief like most men carry pocket watches. But he's also the most fundamentally decent man I've ever known. When he says you're safe here, you are. When he says he'll provide for you, he will. You can trust him, and you can trust me. Why do you work for him? Rose asked. If he's so hard to be around? Maddie smiled. Because 15 years ago, my husband died and left me with nothing. I came to Beckett looking for work as a housekeeper, and he gave me not just a job, but a home. He paid for my husband's debts, set up an account for my retirement, and treated me with more respect than any employer I'd ever had. That's who Beckett Rowan is when you strip away the rough exterior. That's the man you'll get to know if you give him a chance. After Maddie left, the sisters finished their milk in comfortable silence. Then, one by one, they retreated to their own rooms, their own spaces, their own beds. Lydia lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in distant fields, horses nickering in the stable, the wind moving through the cottonwoods. So different from the sounds of town, from the creaking attic that had been their prison for 6 months. She thought about her parents, buried in Clearwater's cemetery. She thought about Silas, probably drinking away his blood money right now. She thought about the auction, the fear, the helplessness. And then she thought about Beckett Rowan's voice cutting through the chaos. $10,000 for all 4, together. He'd saved them. Why exactly, she still wasn't entirely sure. His explanation about his lost daughter felt true, but somehow incomplete. But whatever his reasons, he'd spent a fortune to keep them together, to give them safety and dignity and a chance at something better than being torn apart and used up by cruel strangers. Tomorrow would bring questions, adjustments, challenges. But tonight, for the first time in 6 months, Lydia Marlowe and her sisters slept safely, in warm beds, under a roof held up by a man who'd somehow seen them as worth saving. Lydia woke to sunlight streaming through curtains she didn't recognize, in a bed softer than any she'd ever slept in, and for 3 blissful seconds forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. The auction, Beckett Rowan's thunderous bid, the impossible journey to this ranch, and she sat up so fast her head spun. A knock on the door preceded Maddie's cheerful voice. Up and dressed in 20 minutes, girls. Breakfast doesn't wait, and we've got a full day ahead. 20 minutes later, still wearing yesterday's threadbare dresses because they had nothing else, the 4 sisters descended the grand staircase, an actual staircase with a polished banister, not the rickety ladder to Silas's attic, and followed the smell of bacon and coffee to the kitchen. The room was already bustling with activity. Maddie presided over the stove like a general commanding troops, while 3 ranch hands sat at the long table, shoveling food into their mouths with the single-minded focus of men who did hard physical labor. They looked up when the girls entered, and Lydia tensed, remembering the leering faces at the auction. But these men simply nodded politely and returned to their breakfast. One even stood and pulled out chairs for them, his weathered face creasing into a shy smile. "Morning, señoritas," Carlos said from his spot at the table's head. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," Lydia answered, still wary but trying to match their courtesy. Rose, Clara, and June clustered close to her, their eyes wide at the spread of food covering the table. "Good, good. Sit, eat. Today you meet everyone. See the ranch. Learn how things work here." Carlos gestured to the other men. "This is Tom Bridger. He manages the cattle. And this is Samuel Okonkwo. We call him Sam. He handles the horses, and you know me already." Tom was a lean man of about 40, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. Sam was younger, perhaps 30, with dark skin and an accent that suggested he'd come from somewhere far away. Both nodded to the girls with genuine warmth. "Where's Mr. Rowan?" Rose asked quietly. "Already out checking the north pastures," Maddie answered, setting plates of eggs, bacon, and fried potatoes in front of each girl. "Man barely sleeps, and when he does, he's up before the roosters. You'll see him at dinner, most likely. Until then, you're with me." The food was extraordinary, rich, plentiful, seasoned with care. The girls ate quickly at first, still half convinced this abundance might vanish, but Maddie kept refilling their plates and murmuring encouragements until they were genuinely full for the first time in months. "Now then," Maddie announced when breakfast was cleared and the ranch hands had returned to their duties. "First order of business is clothes. Can't have you walking around in those rags. Come with me." She led them to a bright sewing room on the second floor, filled with fabric bolts, a treadle sewing machine, and a dress form. Maddie pulled out a measuring tape and began taking detailed measurements of each girl, calling out numbers to herself and making notes in a small leather journal. "Lydia, you're 16 and nearly grown, so we'll make you 3 work dresses, 2 Sunday dresses, and a winter coat. Rose, same for you, but with a bit more room for growing. Clara, June, you'll need more growing room still." She paused, studying them with a critical eye. "You're all too thin. We'll make these with extra seam allowance so we can let them out as you gain proper weight." "Mrs. Maddie," Lydia corrected herself. "This is too much. We can't possibly—" "Can't possibly what? Wear clothes? Don't be ridiculous." Maddie's tone brooked no argument. "Beckett gave me a budget for outfitting you 4, and I intend to use every penny of it. Besides, I enjoy sewing. Gives me something to do besides managing cowboys who can't tell a properly folded napkin from a horse blanket." While Maddie worked on the first dress pattern, she kept up a steady stream of conversation, clearly trying to put the girls at ease. "Now, I know yesterday was overwhelming, and you're probably wondering what life will be like here. So let me paint you a picture. Mornings start at 6 with breakfast, earlier in summer, a bit later in deep winter. After breakfast, everyone has responsibilities. The ranch hands work the cattle and horses, I manage the house, and you girls will help me while also pursuing your education." "Education?" Claire's eyes lit up like someone had offered her gold. "Absolutely. Beckett was serious about that. I'll teach you core subjects, reading, writing, mathematics, history. But we'll also bring in specialists when needed. There's a music teacher in Clearwater, Mrs. Pemberton, who I'm told is excellent, and a mathematics tutor in Topeka if Clara here wants to pursue numbers beyond what I can offer." "I do," Clara breathed. "I really, really do." Maddie smiled. "Thought you might. You've got that look about you, the kind of mind that sees patterns in everything. My late husband was the same way. Used to calculate rainfall probabilities in his head for fun." Over the next hour, as Maddie pinned and cut fabric with expert efficiency, she shared more details about ranch life. The household staff included her, a part-time laundress named Mrs. Chen, who came twice weekly, and occasionally a handyman for major repairs. The ranch employed about 20 cowboys year-round, with more hired during cattle drives and harvest seasons. Beckett managed everything with Carlos's help, and together they'd built the Rowan Range into one of the most successful operations in Kansas. "He's not an easy man to work for," Maddie admitted, her hands never stopping their work. "Expects perfection, doesn't tolerate laziness or excuses, and his temper can be fierce when things go wrong. But he's scrupulously fair, pays better than any rancher in 3 states, and never asks anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. You'll see him out there with the hands, branding cattle, mending fences, breaking horses. He's not some gentleman rancher who just collects profits." "Why did he come to Kansas?" Lydia asked. "Carlos mentioned he was from Texas originally." Maddie's expression grew thoughtful. "That's his story to tell, not mine. But I will say this. Beckett Rowan is a man who's known great loss and great hardship. Makes him hard, yes, but also makes him understand what it's like to need help and not get it. That's why he helped you 4. He sees himself in every lost soul, every person ground down by circumstances beyond their control. A commotion outside drew their attention to the window. Below, in a large corral, Sam was working with a magnificent black stallion that clearly had no interest in being worked with. The horse reared and plunged, fighting the long lead rope with savage determination. "That's Midnight," Maddie explained. "Sam's been trying to gentle him for 2 months now. Horse was wild caught up in the Northern Territories. Beautiful animal, but mean as a snake." June pressed her face to the window, transfixed. "He's scared." "He's dangerous," Maddie corrected. "Already kicked 2 men hard enough to break ribs." "No, look at his eyes. He's not mean. He's terrified. He thinks Sam is going to hurt him." Lydia exchanged glances with Rose and Clara. June had always had an uncanny connection with animals. Back home, she'd tamed every stray cat and injured bird that crossed their path. Their father used to joke that June could convince a wolf to sit for tea if she put her mind to it. "Well, scared or not, that horse is a problem," Maddie said. "Beckett's considering sending him back to the wild before someone gets killed. Can I try?" June's voice was small but determined. "Absolutely not. You're 8 years old, and that animal weighs half a ton." But June kept watching, her small face pressed to the glass, and Lydia could see the wheels turning in her sister's mind. This would bear watching. By midday, Maddie had completed one simple dress for each girl. Nothing fancy, just serviceable cotton in various colors, but they fit properly and were clean and whole. The girls changed in their respective rooms, and the transformation was remarkable. In proper clothing, with their faces scrubbed and hair brushed, they looked less like street urchins and more like what they'd been before tragedy struck, respectable young ladies from a decent family. "Much better," Maddie declared. "Now, let's tackle the next challenge, your education. Follow me." The library looked even more impressive in full daylight. Afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating thousands of books arranged in neat categories. Maddie pulled volumes from various shelves, stacking them on a large reading table. "These are your starting points. Lydia, as the oldest, you'll begin with advanced literature and history. Rose, I'm putting you on geography and natural sciences. I think you'll find them interesting. Clara, here's a mathematics primer, but I suspect you'll blow through it in a week. June, you'll start with basic reading primers and work up from there." She settled into a comfortable chair and looked at each girl in turn. "Now, I need to understand where you are academically. Tell me about your schooling before things changed." Lydia spoke first. "We all attended Clearwater Elementary until last spring. I just completed 10th grade. Rose had finished 8th, Clara was in 7th, and June was in 3rd. Our mother supplemented with extra lessons at home. She'd been a teacher herself before marriage." "Good foundation, then. What subjects did you excel in?" "Rose loved literature and music. Clara was doing algebra already, far ahead of her classmates. June," Lydia smiled at her youngest sister. "June could barely sit still long enough for lessons. She was always outside with animals." "Everyone learns differently," Maddie said diplomatically. "We'll work with each of your strengths. Now I want you to take these books to your rooms and read for 2 hours. Make notes on anything you don't understand. We'll reconvene before dinner and discuss what you've learned." The afternoon passed in peaceful quiet, broken only by the sounds of pages turning and occasional questions. Lydia immersed herself in a history of the Roman Empire, finding unexpected comfort in stories of people who'd lived and died hundreds of years ago, their struggles reduced to sentences in books. Rose disappeared into a botanical guide, sketching the flower illustrations in a notebook Maddie had provided. Clara worked through mathematics problems with visible joy, each solved equation making her smile. And June, restless as predicted, managed about 30 minutes of reading before slipping out to explore the ranch. Lydia found her an hour later in the stable, sitting perfectly still in an empty stall, while Midnight, the supposedly vicious stallion, stretched his neck toward her from the adjacent stall, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. "June Marie Marlowe," Lydia hissed. "Get away from that horse right now." "Shh, you'll spook him." June didn't move, didn't even look away from the stallion. "See how his ears are forward? He's curious. He wants to know if I'm dangerous." "He's the dangerous one. Maddie said he broke men's ribs. Because they scared him. They tried to force him with ropes and whips, but if you just sit quiet and let him come to you." June slowly extended her hand, palm up, toward the bars separating the stalls. "You have to let him choose. Midnight snorted, stamped once, then took a tentative step closer. His eyes, Lydia noticed, were huge and liquid brown, ringed with white that suggested fear rather than malice. "June, please." But the stallion had already made his decision. He stretched his neck fully through the bars and gently snuffled June's palm, his breath warm and grassy sweet. Then, incredibly, he lowered his massive head and let June scratch between his ears. "Good boy," June whispered. "Nobody's going to hurt you anymore. I promise." Footsteps behind them made Lydia spin around. Sam stood there, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How? That horse won't let anyone within 10 feet without trying to kill them." "He's not trying to kill anyone," June said calmly, still stroking Midnight's face. "He's trying to protect himself. There's a difference." Sam moved closer, slowly, his experienced eye assessing the situation. "Miss June, I've been working with horses since I was younger than you. Trained hundreds of them, but I've never seen anything like this." "Maybe you've been training them wrong." June's voice held no malice, just simple observation. "You can't make a horse trust you. You have to earn it. And how does a little girl know so much about horses?" "I don't know about horses. I know about being scared and having nobody listen." June finally looked up at Sam, her young face serious. "When people grabbed us at the auction, trying to separate us, I wanted to kick and bite and run. Midnight feels the same way when you corner him, so I just let him know I understand." Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he squatted down to June's level. "Miss June, would you like to help me with the horses? Not Midnight yet. He's still too dangerous for a child, even one with your gift. But we have younger horses, gentler ones, who could use someone with your touch." June's face lit up like sunrise. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it. But," he held up one finger, "only if Miss Lydia agrees and only when your studies are done for the day. Education comes first." Lydia wanted to refuse, to keep June safe and away from 1,000-pound animals with minds of their own, but she saw the hope in her sister's eyes, the first real spark of joy since their parents died, and couldn't bring herself to extinguish it. "After studies," she agreed, "and only with Sam supervising, and if you get hurt even once—" "I won't, I promise." June threw her arms around Lydia's waist. "Thank you, thank you." That evening, the four sisters gathered in the dining room for their first formal dinner at the ranch. The room was impressive, dark wood paneling, a table that could seat 20, and a chandelier with actual crystal pendants. Maddie had set 6 places, 4 for the girls, 1 for herself, and 1 at the head of the table for Beckett. He arrived exactly at 6, still dusty from his day's work, but with his hair combed and hands scrubbed clean. He'd changed into a fresh shirt, and Lydia realized this was his concession to formal dining. He'd made himself presentable for their benefit. "Evening," he said, taking his seat. "How was your first full day?" "Overwhelming," Lydia answered honestly. "But good. Maddie has been very kind." "Maddie's the backbone of this operation. I just provide the cattle and cash." He accepted a bowl of stew from the older woman with a nod of thanks. "I understand you all received clothes and books today. That's a start. Tomorrow we'll inventory what else you need." "Mr. Rowan?" Rose ventured hesitantly. "Maddie mentioned a music teacher in town." "Mrs. Pemberton?" "Can't stand the woman personally. She talks too much about other people's business. But she knows music, I'll grant her that. You interested in lessons?" Rose's hands fluttered in her lap, clearly nervous. "I used to play piano, before. Our mother taught me, and I was learning quite advanced pieces. But I haven't practiced in months, and I've probably forgotten everything, and I'm sure it's too expensive. There's a piano in the parlor," Beckett interrupted. "Belonged to my wife. Nobody's touched it since she died. If you want to use it, it's yours. And I'll arrange for Mrs. Pemberton to come twice weekly. Cost doesn't matter." Tears spilled down Rose's cheeks. "Thank you. You can't know what that means." "I can, actually. My Sarah played piano, used to drive me half crazy with her practicing, same scales over and over. I'd give everything I owned to hear that noise again." He cleared his throat roughly. "Anyway, Rose gets music lessons. What about the rest of you? What do you need to thrive here?" Clara spoke up, emboldened by Rose's success. Books, specifically mathematics and science books, advanced ones, and maybe, is there any way to get correspondence courses from a university? Beckett's eyebrows rose. You're 12 years old, and I've already completed the standard mathematics curriculum through 10th grade. I need something more challenging. Confident little thing, aren't you? I'm accurate, not confident. There's a difference. Despite himself, Beckett smiled. Fair enough. I'll write to Kansas State. They might have extension programs. What else? June, still glowing from her afternoon with the horses, piped up. Sam said I could help with the horses after my studies are done. Is that really okay? Sam said that? Beckett looked genuinely surprised. Sam, who's been complaining for weeks that none of his men can handle midnight without getting hurt? June got within touching distance of midnight today, Lydia admitted. Somehow convinced him not to kill her. That horse tried to kill me last week. Maybe you were doing it wrong, June said with the brutal honesty of 8-year-olds. The table went silent. Maddie looked like she might faint. The other girls stared at June in horror. Nobody spoke to Beckett Rowan like that. But Beckett just laughed, a real laugh, not the bitter chuckle they'd heard before. You know what, kid? You're probably right. Yes, you can work with Sam, but you follow his instructions exactly, and if he says a horse is too dangerous, you listen. Deal? Deal! Beckett turned his attention to Lydia, his expression growing more serious. And you? What do you need? Lydia had been dreading this question because she didn't have a good answer. Rose had music, Clara had mathematics, June had animals. But what did she have? What had she ever been good at besides taking care of her sisters? I don't know, she admitted quietly. I'm 16. Too old for regular school, too young for work. Back home, I was just helping our mother with housework and childcare. I don't have a special talent like they do. That's not true, Rose protested. You're wonderful at organizing things. You used to help Father with his accounts, remember? And Mother always said you had a natural head for management. Bookkeeping? Beckett asked. That's useful. Carlos is decent enough with numbers, but he hates the administrative side of ranching. If you're interested, I could teach you how to manage business accounts. It's practical knowledge that'll serve you anywhere. Lydia felt something stir in her chest. Not quite hope, but close. I'd like that, yes. Good. We'll start tomorrow afternoon. Fair warning, I'm not a patient teacher, and ranch accounting is complicated. You'll need to work hard to keep up. I will, I promise. The rest of dinner passed with easier conversation. Maddie shared gossip about the ranch hands, who was courting whom, which cowboy had gotten drunk and fallen in the horse trough, the ongoing feud between two men over whose saddle was better made. It was mundane, comfortable domestic talk, and the girls slowly began to relax. After dinner, Rose asked shyly if she could see the piano. Beckett led them all to the parlor, where a beautiful upright instrument stood in one corner, its wood gleaming in the lamplight despite 3 years of disuse. Rose approached it reverently, running her fingers over the keys without pressing them down. It's beautiful. It's out of tune, Beckett said. I'll have the tuner come from Topeka next week, but for tonight, if you want to play, play. Rose settled onto the bench, closed her eyes, and let her hands find the keys. What emerged was halting at first. She'd been honest about being rusty, but gradually the music smoothed out. She played a simple hymn, one their mother used to sing while cooking dinner, and the sound filled the parlor with bittersweet memory. When the last note faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Beckett stood with his jaw clenched tight, staring at the floor. My Sarah used to play that hymn, he said roughly, every Sunday morning. Drove me half crazy with it. I'm sorry, Rose whispered. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize for making music, just practice more. Get better. She'd want that piano used properly. He turned abruptly and left the room, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Maddie squeezed Rose's shoulder. You did good, child. That's the most emotion I've seen from him in 3 years. Music has a way of reaching places words can't. That night, as the girls prepared for bed, they gathered once more in Lydia's room, a habit from the terrible months in Silas's attic that none of them wanted to break yet. It's real, isn't it? Clara said, curled up at the foot of Lydia's bed with her mathematics book. This place, Beckett, Maddie, We're really going to be okay. I think so, Lydia answered, but we need to be careful. We need to prove we're worth the investment he made. Worth it? Rose frowned. Lydia, he didn't buy us as investments. He saved us. He spent $20,000 on us. That's more money than most people see in their entire lives. We owe him. We don't owe him anything, June interrupted with surprising firmness. Sam said Beckett doesn't help people because he expects something back. He does it because his heart won't let him do anything else. June's right, Clara added. This isn't about debt. It's about him needing to save people the way he couldn't save his daughter. We're helping him as much as he's helping us. Lydia wanted to argue, but something in their words rang true. She'd seen the pain in Beckett's face when Rose played that hymn, the way he'd looked at June when she smiled, the gentleness hidden beneath his gruff exterior. He wasn't collecting charity cases. He was trying to fill a hole in his heart that his daughter's death had left behind. All right, she conceded, but we still work hard. We still prove we belong here. Agreed? Agreed. The weeks that followed established patterns and routines that slowly began to feel like normalcy. Mornings meant breakfast with the ranch hands, followed by 3 hours of intensive study with Maddie. The girls threw themselves into learning with the desperation of people who'd been starving intellectually. Rose progressed through geography and literature while practicing piano 3 hours daily. Clara devoured mathematics texts and began corresponding with a professor at Kansas State who was astonished by her aptitude. June struggled through reading primers but excelled with the horses, spending every free moment in the stables under Sam's patient tutelage. And Lydia learned the intricate dance of ranch management from Beckett himself. Every afternoon at 2 o'clock sharp, she'd join him in his office, a cluttered room filled with ledgers, maps, and the smell of leather and tobacco. He'd spread the account books before her and explained the complex economics of cattle ranching, feed costs, market prices, seasonal variations, transportation expenses, payroll management. The key to any business, he told her during their first lesson, is knowing exactly where every dollar goes. You see this entry here? That's $300 for winter feed. Seems expensive until you realize it's what keeps 2,000 head of cattle alive until spring. That investment returns $15,000 in beef sales. Understand? Lydia studied the numbers, seeing patterns emerge. So you spend money to make money, but you have to calculate the return ratio carefully. Exactly. And you have to plan for disasters, drought, disease, market crashes. Always keep 6 months of operating capital in reserve. That cushion is what separates successful ranchers from bankrupt ones. She proved to be a quick study, her natural organizational skills flowering under proper instruction. Within 2 weeks, she was catching errors in the books. Within a month, she was suggesting more efficient ways to structure accounts. You're good at this, Beckett admitted one afternoon, reviewing her work. Better than Carlos, honestly, and he's been doing it for years. I like the clarity of it, Lydia answered. Numbers don't lie. They're either right or wrong. There's comfort in that certainty. He gave her an appraising look. You've spent too much time in situations where nothing was certain, haven't you? Where the ground kept shifting under your feet. Lydia met his gaze steadily. 6 months ago, I had parents and a home and a future I could see. Then everything disappeared in the space of 3 weeks. So yes, I appreciate certainty now. Nothing's ever truly certain, Beckett said, but proper planning helps. Control what you can, prepare for what you can't, and don't waste energy on what you can't influence. That's how you survive. Is that how you survived? After your wife and daughter? The question was forward, probably inappropriate, but Lydia had never been good at leaving difficult truths unspoken. Beckett was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. No, he finally said. After they died, I didn't survive. I just existed, went through motions, built the ranch bigger because working 18-hour days meant I didn't have to think. But surviving, actually living, that's still a work in progress. And buying 4 orphans at auction, does that help? His smile was sad. Ask me again in a year. Maybe we'll both have answers by then. As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch transformed. The cottonwoods went gold and bare. Frost etched patterns on the windows each morning, and the cattle were moved to winter pastures closer to the ranch buildings. The girls acquired proper winter coats, warm boots, and gloves that actually fit. Maddie taught them to preserve food, manage a household budget, and navigate the complex social dynamics of ranch life. The first snow came in early December, transforming the Rowan Range into something from a fairy tale. Lydia stood at her bedroom window watching fat flakes drift down in the pre-dawn darkness, remembering last winter when she and her sisters had huddled in Silas's freezing attic with only threadbare blankets for warmth. Now she had a warm room, a soft bed, and the certainty of breakfast waiting downstairs. The contrast was almost painful in its mercy. She was halfway through her morning routine when Rose burst into her room without knocking, her face pale and her hands shaking. "Lydia, something's wrong. There are men coming up the road. A lot of men." They rushed to the window together. Through the falling snow, Lydia could make out 5 riders approaching the ranch house, their dark coats stark against the white landscape. They moved with purpose, not the casual pace of neighbors or merchants. Even from this distance, something about them radiated authority and menace. "Get Clara and June," Lydia ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Stay upstairs until I know what's happening." She descended the stairs to find Maddie already at the front window, her usually warm face set in hard lines. Carlos stood beside her, and through the kitchen door Lydia could see several ranch hands gathering, their expressions wary. "Who are they?" Lydia asked. "Trouble," Maddie said flatly. "Government men, by the look of them." "Carlos, wake Beckett." But Beckett was already striding down the stairs, pulling on his coat as he moved. He'd clearly been awake for hours already, despite the early dawn. His face was thunderous as he looked out at the approaching riders. "Everyone stay inside," he commanded. "Maddie, get the girls together. Carlos, I want you and Tom ready, but out of sight. This is about to get ugly." The riders pulled up in front of the house just as full dawn broke over the snowy prairie. The lead man dismounted with practiced efficiency, and Lydia felt her stomach clench. He was tall and lean, with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of flint. Everything about him spoke of power, wielded without mercy. Beckett opened the door before the man could knock, positioning himself in the doorway like a fortress wall. "Help you gentlemen with something?" "Mr. Beckett Rowan?" The man's voice was smooth, educated, and cold as the winter air. "I'm Inspector Hollis Vane, representing the Federal Bureau of Child Welfare. These are my associates, Deputy Inspector Morton, Deputy Inspector Keyes, and Agents Bradford and Sullivan. We're here regarding 4 minor children currently residing on this property." Lydia's blood turned to ice. Beside her, Maddie's hand found hers and squeezed hard. "The Marlowe sisters are residents here, yes," Beckett said carefully. "What's your interest in them?" "Our interest, Mr. Rowan, is ensuring the welfare of displaced children. We've received reports that you purchased 4 orphaned girls at a public auction 3 months ago. Is this accurate?" "I prevented 4 girls from being sold separately to God knows what kind of situation." "Yes." "And did you go through proper legal channels to establish guardianship, submit the required documentation to state authorities, undergo the mandatory character reviews and home inspections?" Beckett's jaw tightened. "I saved 4 children from being torn apart like livestock. I didn't think I needed government permission for basic human decency." "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Rowan." Vane pulled a leather folder from his coat and extracted several official-looking documents. "Under the Federal Child Protection Act of 1885, any person seeking to assume guardianship of unrelated minors must complete a rigorous application process. This process includes background investigations, home environment assessments, and interviews with qualified social workers. You've completed none of these steps because they're bureaucratic nonsense designed to make people feel important while children suffer. Your opinion on federal policy is noted and dismissed. The fact remains that you are currently harboring 4 minor children without legal authority. We're here to rectify that situation." Maddie pushed past Beckett onto the porch, her eyes blazing. "Harboring? These girls aren't criminals, and neither is Beckett. They have good food, warm beds, education, and safety. What more could you possibly want for them?" Vane's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Harper, I presume? Your dedication is admirable but misplaced. Mr. Rowan is an unmarried man with no female relatives in residence. The very idea of him raising 4 young girls alone raises serious propriety concerns." "I'm here," Maddie snapped. I've been managing this household for 15 years. There's more propriety and decency in this ranch house than in half the so-called proper families in Kansas. Be that as it may, federal regulations are clear. These girls need to be placed in an appropriate institution where they can receive proper care and education. Institution? Rose's voice came from behind Lydia, trembling with fear. All four sisters had crept to the top of the stairs, unable to stay away despite Beckett's orders. You mean an orphanage? Vane looked up at them, and for just a moment, something that might have been sympathy flickered across his face. Miss Marlowe, I understand this is frightening, but institutions exist for your protection. They provide structured environments with trained supervisors, proper schooling, and preparation for your future. They separate sisters, Clara said, her voice hard despite her fear. I've read about them. They split siblings up by age, sometimes send them to different facilities entirely. You're not here to protect us. You're here to tear us apart just like the auction would have. That's inflammatory and inaccurate. Is it? June's small voice carried clearly in the cold morning air. Will you promise we stay together? All four of us in the same place? Vane hesitated, and that hesitation told them everything they needed to know. That's what I thought, June said quietly. Beckett stepped fully onto the porch, putting himself between the inspectors and the house. You're not taking them. I don't care what papers you're waving around. These girls are thriving here. They're educated, healthy, and happy. No bureaucrat in Washington is going to destroy that. Mr. Rowan, I'm trying to handle this civilly, but if you refuse to cooperate, I'm authorized to involve local law enforcement. Sheriff Patterson is already aware of our presence in the county. Patterson's a political coward who does whatever the territorial governor tells him, but even he won't side with you once he sees how well these girls are doing. Then you won't mind if we conduct an inspection? Interview the girls, review their living conditions, assess their education and general welfare. Vane's smile was thin and sharp. After all, if everything is as wonderful as you claim, you have nothing to hide. It was a trap, and everyone knew it. Refuse the inspection and appear guilty of wrongdoing. Allow it and give these men ammunition to find fault with anything and everything. Lydia watched Beckett's hands clench into fists, watched him struggle with the desire to throw these men off his property by force. Fine, he said finally. Inspect all you want, but I'm warning you now, you won't find anything that justifies removing them. We'll see about that, Vane gestured to his associates. Keyes, begin with the girls' living quarters. Morton, review any educational materials and records. Bradford, Sullivan, assess the general property conditions. I'll interview the children myself. The next several hours were pure torture. The inspectors moved through the house with cold efficiency, examining everything, making notes in leather journals, speaking in low voices that carried judgment in every syllable. Keyes spent 20 minutes in each girl's bedroom, measuring room dimensions, checking bed linens, even examining the contents of their wardrobes. These clothes are new, he observed, holding up one of Rose's dresses. Custom-made, expensive fabric. Where did the money for this come from? I made them, Maddie said icily. Mr. Rowan provided the materials. Is it a crime to clothe children properly? It's unusual for a man to spend so lavishly on unrelated girls. It raises questions about his motivations. His motivations are that he's a decent human being who saw children in need. If that's suspicious to you, maybe you're the one with questionable judgment. Keyes made another note without responding. Morton examined the library with barely concealed skepticism. These are advanced texts, far beyond what children their ages should be studying. Latin primers, advanced mathematics, collegiate-level literature. This seems more like Mr. Rowan showing off his wealth than providing appropriate education. I'm working 3 years ahead of my age level, Clara informed him coldly. Because I can. Because Maddie and Mr. Rowan believe children should be challenged, not held back to arbitrary standards. Is that a problem? It's unusual. So is being forced to watch your parents die and then getting sold at auction. But here we are. Morton's lips thinned. More notes. Meanwhile, Vane gathered the four sisters in the parlor for what he called individual assessments. He insisted on speaking to each girl alone, but Beckett refused to allow it unless he remained present. They compromised on having Maddie in the room as well, though she had to stay silent during questioning. Vane started with June, perhaps thinking the youngest would be easiest to manipulate. He was wrong. Miss June, I want you to be very honest with me. Do you feel safe here? Yes. Has Mr. Rowan ever made you feel uncomfortable or frightened? Only when he's arguing with people trying to take us away. That's pretty frightening, actually. I mean, in your daily life. Has he ever touched you inappropriately or said things that made you uneasy? June's eyes went wide with understanding and then narrow with fury. You think he's one of those bad men? The kind who hurt children? He's not. He's good and kind, and he lets me work with horses, and he never even raises his voice unless someone deserves it. You're horrible for thinking such things. I'm simply doing my job. Your job is mean, and you should quit. June crossed her arms. Are we done? Clara was next, and she approached the interrogation like a mathematical problem, requiring logical solutions. She provided precise answers to every question, quantifying her education progress, detailing the household routine, and explaining the ranch structure with the clinical detachment of a scientist describing an experiment. You seem very analytical, Miss Clara. Tell me, do you have access to other children your age? Social interactions beyond the adults here? Not currently. Clearwater's children were mostly cruel when we lived there, and I don't miss them. I have my sisters, which is sufficient. Children need peer socialization. Children need safety, education, and people who don't treat them like problems to be solved with paperwork. I have those things here. An institution would provide uncomfortable beds, mediocre food, and the company of other miserable children. Where exactly is the benefit? Institutions provide structure. So does this ranch. Next question? Rose, when her turn came, sat with the perfect posture their mother had taught her, and answered every question with painful honesty. Yes, she practiced piano several hours daily. Yes, Mrs. Pemberton came twice weekly for lessons. Yes, she had her own room and adequate clothing and more books than she could read in a year. But are you happy, Miss Rose? Vane pressed. Truly happy? Or are you simply grateful to have escaped worse circumstances? Rose considered this seriously. I'm as happy as someone can be after watching both parents die within 3 weeks of each other. The grief doesn't go away just because your circumstances improve. But here, I have space to grieve properly. I have music again. I have my sisters. In an institution, I'd have none of those things. So yes, Inspector Vane, I'm happy. As happy as I can be right now. Finally, Vane turned to Lydia. She'd been dreading this, knowing that as the oldest, she'd face the harshest scrutiny. Miss Lydia, you're 16 years old, nearly an adult. Surely you understand the unusual nature of this arrangement. I understand that 3 months ago we were being sold at auction like cattle, and Mr. Rowan prevented that. I understand that we're fed, clothed, educated, and safe. I understand that my sisters are thriving here in ways they never could in an institution. What exactly is unusual about that? An unmarried man, raising 4 girls with no blood relation to him, spending enormous sums on their welfare. You must see how this appears from the outside. Lydia leaned forward, her voice dropping to something dangerous. Inspector Vane, are you suggesting that Mr. Rowan has inappropriate intentions toward children? Because if you are, say it plainly so we can address your slander directly. I'm suggesting that the arrangement raises questions that need answers. Here's your answer. Beckett Rowan lost his daughter 3 years ago. He sees in us the child he couldn't save. He's trying to fill a hole in his heart by helping children who need help. That's called grief and redemption, not criminality. If your federal regulations can't distinguish between the two, then your regulations are morally bankrupt. Vane studied her for a long moment. You're protective of him, loyal. That's admirable, but it could also indicate an unhealthy attachment. Stockholm Syndrome, perhaps. Or perhaps it indicates gratitude towards someone who saved our lives when everyone else was willing to let us be torn apart. I know the difference between a captor and a savior, Inspector. Do you? The inspection concluded just before noon, with all 5 men gathering in the parlor to confer while the household waited in tense silence. Lydia stood with her sisters near the stairs, Maddie beside them, with one protective hand on June's shoulder. Beckett remained by the door, his posture radiating barely controlled violence. Finally, Vane emerged from the parlor, his expression unreadable. Mr. Rowan, we've completed our assessment. While we found no evidence of overt abuse or neglect, significant concerns remain regarding the propriety and legality of this arrangement. Meaning what? Beckett's voice was dangerously soft. Meaning that we cannot in good conscience allow 4 minor girls to remain in the custody of an unmarried man without proper legal authority. Therefore, effective immediately, we'll be taking the Marlowe sisters into federal custody pending their placement in an appropriate institutional facility. The room erupted. Maddie gasped. The girls clung to each other. Carlos, who'd been standing silent in the kitchen doorway, swore in Spanish, and Beckett moved with shocking speed, positioning himself between the inspectors and the stairs. "Over my dead body! Mr. Rowan, threatening federal officers is a serious crime. I'm not threatening. I'm making a statement of fact. You will not take these girls. Not today. Not ever. We have legal authority." "I don't give a damn about your legal authority." Beckett's voice shook the windows. "You walked into my home, passed judgment on people you don't know, and decided that bureaucratic compliance matters more than 4 thriving children. That's not justice. That's tyranny. Call it what you like. The law is the law. Girls, please come with us. We'll make this as easy as possible." "No." Lydia's voice cut through the chaos. "We're not going anywhere." Vane's expression hardened. "Miss Lydia, I understand you're upset, but you don't have a choice in this matter." Actually, she does. The new voice came from the front door, which had opened without anyone noticing. A gray-haired man in an expensive suit stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 others. The newcomer's bearing radiated authority that made even Vane pause. "And so do I." "Who the hell are you?" Vane demanded. "Judge Merrill Sloan, Territorial Circuit Court. This is Dr. Edwin Pratt from Kansas City, and this is Attorney Samuel Morrison, admitted to practice before the Supreme Court." The judge stepped fully inside, shaking snow from his coat. "I received a telegram from Beckett yesterday mentioning you might be paying a visit, Inspector Vane, so I took the liberty of assembling some interested parties." "This is federal jurisdiction. This is Kansas territory, which means my authority supersedes federal inspectors operating without territorial warrants." "Do you have warrants, Inspector?" Vane hesitated. "We're operating under federal statute. That's not a warrant, which means you're here on courtesy, not authority. Courtesy that's about to be revoked unless you can demonstrate genuine cause for removing these children." Dr. Pratt stepped forward, a leather medical bag in his hand. "I'm a licensed physician with 20 years' experience in child welfare cases. If the court permits, I'd like to examine the Marlowe sisters and provide an expert medical opinion on their current health and well-being. And I'd like to review the legal basis for this attempted removal," Attorney Morrison added. "Specifically, whether federal regulations supersede territorial custody arrangements, and whether improper procedure invalidates your authority to act." Vane's face had gone rigid. "This is highly irregular. No, Inspector. What's irregular is attempting to remove children from a stable, prosperous home without proper investigation or territorial approval." Judge Sloan settled into a chair without being invited, radiating judicial authority. "Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Easy way is you allow Dr. Pratt to examine the girls, Mr. Morrison to review your documentation, and me to conduct proper legal proceedings before any decisions are made. Hard way is I issue an immediate injunction preventing you from removing these children pending a full territorial hearing, which could take months, your choice." For a long moment, Vane stood frozen, clearly calculating his options. His men looked to him for guidance, their confidence shaken by this unexpected legal resistance. "Fine," Vane said finally, "but we'll be observing every step of this process. And if we find evidence of impropriety, then proper legal action will be taken through appropriate channels," Judge Sloan finished. "As it should be. Dr. Pratt, whenever you're ready." The doctor was gentle and thorough, examining each girl in turn while Maddie remained present. He checked their weight, height, teeth, skin, and general physical condition. He asked questions about sleep, appetite, energy levels, and emotional state. His examination took over an hour, and when he finished, he compiled his notes with professional precision. Meanwhile, Attorney Morrison reviewed Vane's documentation, cross-referencing federal statutes with territorial law, making his own extensive notes. The 2 processes happened simultaneously in different rooms, creating a strange atmosphere of clinical detachment overlaying the household's barely suppressed panic. Finally, late in the afternoon, everyone reconvened in the parlor. Dr. Pratt presented his findings first. In 20 years of medical practice, I've examined hundreds of orphaned and displaced children. I've seen the typical outcomes for children in institutional care versus family environments. And I can state categorically that the Marlowe sisters represent the healthiest, most well-adjusted displaced children I've ever encountered. He opened his notes. Lydia has gained 12 pounds since arriving here 3 months ago, bringing her to a healthy weight for her height and age. Rose has gained 9 pounds and shows no signs of the respiratory issues common in malnourished adolescents. Clara and June have gained 8 and 7 pounds respectively. All 4 girls have excellent dental health, clear skin, bright eyes, and energy levels consistent with proper nutrition and adequate rest. Physical health is only one metric, Vane interjected. I'm not finished. I also assessed psychological well-being. These girls are articulate, confident, and demonstrate strong sibling bonds. They show appropriate emotional responses to questions about their past trauma while also exhibiting healthy coping mechanisms. Lydia displays natural leadership qualities. Rose shows artistic temperament balanced with practical sensibility. Clara demonstrates exceptional intellectual gifts. And June exhibits remarkable emotional intelligence and empathy. Dr. Pratt closed his notes and looked directly at Vane. In my professional opinion, removing these children from their current environment would constitute medical malpractice. They are thriving here in ways that institutional care simply cannot replicate. Your opinion is noted, Vane said stiffly, but regulations exist for reasons beyond individual health metrics. Then perhaps we should examine those regulations. Attorney Morrison stood, holding several documents. Inspector Vane, you've cited the Federal Child Protection Act of 1885 as your authority. However, a careful reading of that statute reveals several interesting points. First, it applies specifically to situations where children are being removed from dangerous or abusive situations. Second, it requires demonstration of actual harm or imminent threat before removal can occur. Third, it explicitly states that federal authority does not supersede existing legal guardianship arrangements without evidence of malfeasance. Mr. Rowan has no legal guardianship. Actually, he does. Territorial law recognizes de facto guardianship when an adult assumes full financial and custodial responsibility for unrelated minors with no other party contesting that arrangement. Beckett Rowan has supported these girls completely for 3 months. Their uncle, who might have contested, relinquished all claims when he accepted payment. No other relatives have emerged. Therefore, under Kansas territorial statute, Mr. Rowan is the girl's legal guardian whether federal paperwork has been filed or not. Vane's jaw clenched. That's a creative interpretation. It's established precedent. I can cite 14 cases from the last decade alone. More importantly, your attempt to remove these children without proper territorial warrants violates their right to due process under the 14th Amendment. Judge Sloan? The judge had been listening quietly, his weathered face betraying nothing. Now he leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of decades of jurisprudence. Inspector Vane, I've heard the medical evidence. I've reviewed the legal arguments. I've observed these children and their living environment, and I'm prepared to rule on this matter immediately unless you can present compelling evidence of actual harm or imminent danger. Can you? Vane looked at his men, then back at the judge. The arrangement is highly irregular. Irregular is not illegal. Harm, Inspector. Can you demonstrate harm? Not yet, but then here's my ruling. The Marlowe sisters will remain in Beckett Rowan's custody pending completion of formal guardianship paperwork, which Mr. Morrison will help file immediately. In the interim, I'm appointing Matilda Harper as co-guardian to address any propriety concerns. Dr. Pratt will conduct quarterly health assessments for the next year. And I'm establishing this household as a provisional model for alternative child placement pending review by the territorial legislature. You can't... I just did. This hearing is concluded. You're welcome to appeal to federal circuit court, but I promise you'll lose. Now get off this property before I hold you in contempt for harassment. Vane stood rigid, fury radiating from every line of his body. This isn't over. We'll be monitoring this situation closely. Please do. Because what you'll see is 4 girls growing into accomplished young women instead of being ground down by institutional indifference. Might learn something useful. The 5 men departed in stiff silence, riding away into the late afternoon snow. Nobody in the ranch house moved until they were completely out of sight. Then June burst into tears, followed quickly by her sisters. Maddie gathered all 4 of them into her arms while Beckett stood frozen, staring at nothing. Judge Sloan approached him quietly. "You cut that closer than I'd like, Beckett. If I hadn't received your telegram yesterday, if Edwin hadn't been willing to travel in winter, if Morrison wasn't the best territorial attorney in Kansas—" "I know." Beckett's voice was hoarse. "Thank you, Merrill. All of you. I owe you more than I can repay. You owe me nothing, but you do owe those girls a proper legal foundation. Morrison will help you navigate the guardianship process, but it needs to happen immediately. Understood?" "Understood." Dr. Pratt closed his medical bag with a decisive snap. "Beckett, I meant what I said in there. Those girls are thriving. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. But be prepared. Vane won't give up easily. Men like him believe in systems more than people. He'll be back. Let him come. Next time I'll be ready." After the visitors departed, the household gathered in the kitchen for an impromptu meal that nobody really tasted. The girls were subdued, the terror of near loss still fresh. Maddie cooked mechanically, her usual warmth replaced by grim determination. Even the ranch hands who filtered in for dinner were quiet, having heard about the day's events. It was Clara who finally broke the silence. "They're going to keep trying, aren't they? People like Inspector Vane. They're going to keep finding reasons why we shouldn't be here." "Probably," Beckett admitted. "Some people can't accept anything that doesn't fit their predetermined categories. We're going to have to prove them wrong, repeatedly." "How?" Rose asked. "How do we prove we belong here?" Lydia had been thinking about this all afternoon, watching the inspectors search for fault, listening to them dismiss every positive aspect of their lives here because it didn't fit bureaucratic expectations. An idea had been forming, dangerous but necessary. "We show them something they can't ignore," she said slowly. "We don't just succeed here. We excel so dramatically that removing us would be obviously harmful. Rose becomes such an accomplished musician that taking her away from her piano would be cruel. Clara advances so far in mathematics that institutions couldn't possibly provide appropriate education. June develops such rare talent with horses that her gift becomes undeniable. And she paused, meeting Beckett's eyes. "I learned to run this ranch so well that I become indispensable to its operation." "That's a lot of pressure to put on yourselves," Maddie said gently. "We're already under pressure," Clara pointed out. "At least this way we're using it productively." Beckett studied each of them in turn, and Lydia saw something shift in his expression. Pride, maybe. Or recognition that these children he'd saved were becoming something more than victims needing rescue. "All right," he said finally, "then that's what we do. We turn this ranch into something so successful, so undeniably positive, that no bureaucrat in Washington can touch it. But understand this, it won't be easy. You'll work harder than you've ever worked. You'll face doubts and setbacks and people determined to see you fail. Can you handle that?" 4 voices answered in unison. "Yes." "Then we start tomorrow. Rose, I'm doubling your music lessons and bringing in a composition teacher from Kansas City. Clara, I'm enrolling you in correspondence courses from 3 universities simultaneously. June, Sam's going to teach you not just horse care, but breeding, training, and veterinary basics. And Lydia," he smiled grimly, "you're about to learn what it really means to run a cattle empire." That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, Lydia stood at her window watching snow fall over the Rowan Range. Somewhere out there, Inspector Vane was plotting his next move. Somewhere in Clearwater, people were gossiping about the scandal of Beckett Rowan and his purchased orphans. Somewhere in the vast machinery of government, bureaucrats were filing reports and making decisions about children they'd never met. But here, in this moment, 4 sisters were safe and together under a roof held up by a man who'd chosen to care when he could have looked away. Whatever battles lay ahead, they'd face them together. The snow continued falling, covering the world in white silence, and Lydia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could win this fight. Winter deepened into the harshest months, but inside the Rowan Range, a different kind of fire burned. The girls threw themselves into their work with the fierce determination of people who knew exactly what they stood to lose. Every morning began before dawn. Every evening stretched long past dinner, and the space between filled with learning, practice, and transformation that would have seemed impossible just months before. Rose's piano playing evolved from competent to extraordinary. Mrs. Pemberton, the music teacher from Clearwater, initially arrived twice weekly with her usual condescending attitude toward charity cases. That lasted exactly one lesson. After hearing Rose work through a Chopin nocturne with technical precision and genuine emotional depth, Mrs. Pemberton's entire demeanor changed. "Miss Marlowe," she said, her voice uncharacteristically humble, "I've been teaching piano for 30 years. I've instructed daughters of senators and granddaughters of railroad magnates, and in all that time, I've encountered perhaps 3 students with your natural gift. You're wasting it out here on the prairie." "I'm not wasting anything," Rose replied, her fingers still resting on the keys. "I'm building it." "There's a difference." Mrs. Pemberton studied her for a long moment. "You need more than I can teach you. You need a conservatory education, exposure to master musicians, opportunities to perform. Have you considered the Chicago Musical College, or perhaps the New England Conservatory?" "I've considered staying with my sisters and becoming the best pianist I can be right here." "But my potential isn't going anywhere, and neither am I." Rose's voice carried quiet steel. "Now, can we work on the Beethoven Sonata? I'm struggling with the 3rd movement." Mrs. Pemberton returned to Clearwater that afternoon and did something unexpected. She wrote letters to every musical contact she had in Kansas City, Topeka, and Chicago, describing a prodigy living on a cattle ranch who refused to leave her family. Within 2 weeks, the responses began arriving. A renowned composer offered to take Rose as a correspondence student. A concert pianist volunteered to visit quarterly for intensive master classes. The director of the Kansas City Symphony extended a standing invitation for Rose to attend any rehearsal or performance. When Beckett saw the stack of letters, he simply handed them to Rose without comment. She read each one carefully, then looked up with tears in her eyes. "They want me to come to them. All of them. They think I'm wasting my gift here." "Are you?" Beckett asked. "No. I'm sharing it. That's different." She placed the letters aside and returned to her piano, launching into a Bach fugue with such passion that ranch hands working in the yard stopped to listen. Clara's transformation was equally dramatic but manifested differently. The correspondence courses from 3 universities arrived in thick packages every 2 weeks, and she devoured them with the hunger of someone finally being fed after years of starvation. Mathematics, physics, engineering principles, agricultural science, she absorbed everything and demanded more. "This is wrong," she announced one evening at dinner, slapping a returned assignment onto the table. "The professor marked this answer incorrect, but I can prove he's using an outdated formula. Look." She proceeded to fill 3 pages with calculations demonstrating that the accepted method for computing crop yield ratios contained a fundamental error. Beckett, who understood ranch economics but not advanced mathematics, could only stare at the strings of numbers and symbols. "You're saying a university professor is wrong?" "I'm saying the textbook he's using was published in 1878 and doesn't account for variables we now know matter. I've written a paper explaining the corrected formula. Can you mail it to him?" The professor's response came 2 weeks later. Not a grade or dismissal, but a personal letter requesting permission to present Clara's work at an academic conference. He wanted to know if she'd consider early admission to Kansas State's mathematics program. Clara was 12 years old. "Absolutely not," she said when Beckett showed her the letter. "I'm not leaving my sisters for university, but I will keep writing papers. If they want to publish them, fine. If they want to learn from a 12-year-old, that's their problem to solve." Her second paper, on optimization strategies for cattle breeding using probability theory, caused 3 agricultural journals to fight over publication rights. Her third, applying geometric principles to fence construction for maximum grazing efficiency, was eventually adopted by ranchers across 4 states. "You're going to be famous," Lydia told her one night. "I'm going to be useful," Clara corrected. "Fame is what happens when usefulness becomes visible." June's gift with horses became something close to legendary. Under Sam's patient tutelage, she developed an almost supernatural ability to understand equine behavior. Horses that had been written off as too wild, too aggressive, or too fearful would calm under her hands within hours. She worked with them not through domination, but through communication in a language that transcended words. Midnight, the black stallion who'd tried to kill multiple ranch hands, became her particular project. Every day after her academic studies concluded, June would spend 2 hours in the stable with him. Not training, exactly. Just being present, speaking softly, letting him understand that she posed no threat. "You're wasting time," one of the newer cowboys told her after watching this routine for a week. "That horse is mean by nature. Won't never be good for nothing but glue." June didn't even look at him. "He's not mean. He's traumatized. Someone hurt him badly before he came here, and he hasn't forgotten. Would you trust people quickly if they'd tortured you? It's a horse, not a person. Pain is pain. Fear is fear. Doesn't matter if you have 2 legs or 4. 2 months after Inspector Vane's visit, on a brittle February morning when frost painted the windows white, June led Midnight out of his stall on a loose lead rope. The stallion followed her like a puppy, his ears forward, his eyes calm. She led him into the training ring where a dozen ranch hands had gathered to watch, including Sam, Carlos, and Beckett himself. "June," Sam called out, his voice tight with concern. "Are you certain about this?" "I'm certain. He's ready." She spent the next hour demonstrating what trust looked like. Midnight allowed her to touch every part of his body, lift his hooves, drape herself across his back. When she finally slid onto him bareback with nothing but a rope halter for control, the watching men held their collective breath. Midnight stood perfectly still, waiting. June squeezed gently with her legs, and the stallion walked forward smoothly. She guided him through figure eights, stops, and turns with nothing but weight shifts and whispered words. Then, with a confidence that seemed impossible in an 8-year-old, she asked him to run. The stallion exploded into a gallop, his hooves thundering against the frozen earth, his mane streaming like black silk. But it wasn't wild or uncontrolled. He responded to June's slightest cues, his power channeled into perfect partnership. They flew around the ring 3 times before June asked him to stop, and he slid to a halt so precisely he stopped exactly where he'd started. The ranch hands erupted in cheers and applause. Sam was openly crying, and Beckett, standing at the fence rail, looked at this tiny girl who'd accomplished in 2 months what experienced trainers couldn't achieve in years, and shook his head in wonder. "June Marlowe," he said when she dismounted and led Midnight back to him, "you just made that horse worth 10 times what I paid for him. More importantly, you proved something I've believed my whole life. Gentleness is stronger than force, always. Does this mean I can work with the other difficult horses?" Beckett laughed, a sound the ranch heard more and more often these days. "It means you can work with any horse on this property. Sam, from now on, June has equal authority with you in the stables. Any horse she wants to train, she trains, understood?" "Understood, Jefe. Happily." News of June's gift spread quickly through the ranching community. Within weeks, neighboring ranchers were bringing problem horses to the Rowan Range, offering good money for June's training services. She accepted every horse, worked with each one with patience and care, and sent them home transformed. By spring, there was a 6-month waiting list. "We should charge more," Lydia suggested, reviewing the accounts one afternoon with Beckett. "June's services are worth at least double what we're asking." "Probably triple," Beckett agreed. "But that's not the point. Every horse she trains, every rancher she helps, that's more evidence that this place is special, that these girls are exceptional. When Vane comes back, and he will, I want half of Kansas testifying on our behalf." Lydia understood the strategy, but she also understood economics. "We can build goodwill and charge fair market rates. I've drawn up a new fee structure that's competitive but not exploitative, and I've drafted contracts protecting both parties." She slid her proposal across the desk. Beckett read it carefully, his eyebrows rising steadily higher. "This is sophisticated work. Are you sure you're 16? "I'm 17 as of last week, actually, and I've been managing these accounts for 4 months now. I know what I'm doing." "Clearly." He signed the proposal without changes. "All right, implement it. You're officially the ranch business manager. That comes with a salary, by the way. 10% of profits above operational costs." Lydia's breath caught. "That's too much. That's standard for competent management. You've increased our efficiency by 20% and our profits by 30. You've earned it. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. What are you going to do with the money? Save it? For college, maybe? Or to help my sisters when they need it? Or... She hesitated. Maybe to prove I can be independent someday. That I'm not just someone who needed rescuing. Lydia, you stopped needing rescuing about 5 minutes after you got here. What you needed was opportunity. There's a difference. The difference between needing rescue and needing opportunity became the foundation of everything that happened next. Because Beckett's victory over Inspector Vane, combined with the girl's obvious success, caught the attention of people beyond Kansas territory. In March, a journalist from the Chicago Tribune arrived at the ranch, asking to write a feature about the cattle baron and his orphan prodigies. Beckett's first instinct was to refuse, but Lydia convinced him otherwise. This is how we change the narrative, she argued. Right now, we're defending ourselves against accusations of impropriety. But if we control the story, we become pioneers of a better approach. We're not hiding 4 girls on a ranch. We're demonstrating an alternative to institutional care. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Sullivan, spent 3 days at the ranch. She interviewed everyone from Beckett to the newest stable hand. She attended Rose's piano lessons and watched Clara work through advanced calculus problems. She observed June training horses and reviewed Lydia's business management protocols. And she examined the household finances, the educational resources, and the girls' health records with the thoroughness of someone expecting to find cracks in the facade. She found none. Her article appeared in April under the headline, "The Rowan Method: How One Ranch is Revolutionizing Child Welfare." It detailed everything: the auction, Beckett's intervention, Inspector Vane's attempted removal, Judge Sloan's ruling, and most importantly, the undeniable evidence of 4 girls thriving beyond anyone's expectations. The article concluded, in an era when orphaned children are warehoused in crowded institutions and treated as problems to be managed rather than people with potential, Beckett Rowan and Matilda Harper have demonstrated something radical. They've proven that with proper resources, genuine care, and respect for individual talents, so-called displaced children can not merely survive but excel. The question facing federal policymakers is simple. Will they learn from this success, or will they allow bureaucratic rigidity to destroy it? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Letters poured in from across the country, some supportive, many critical, all passionate. Social reformers hailed the ranch as a model. Traditional child welfare advocates condemned it as dangerous precedent. Politicians demanded investigations. And newspapers from Boston to San Francisco picked up the story, each adding their own editorial spin. "We're famous," Rose said, reading one of the dozens of newspaper clippings that arrived daily. "Or infamous. I'm not sure which." "Both," Clara observed. "We've become a symbol of something bigger than ourselves. People aren't really arguing about us anymore. They're arguing about what we represent." She was right. The debate that erupted in newspapers, churches, and legislative chambers wasn't really about 4 specific girls. It was about fundamental questions. What did society owe its most vulnerable members? Should child welfare prioritize safety through institutional control or opportunity through family-style care? Who decided what was proper when it came to raising children? Inspector Vane, predictably, used the publicity to renew his campaign against the ranch. He published a response to Sullivan's article, arguing that the Marlowe sisters' success was an aberration that couldn't be replicated at scale. He claimed that Beckett's wealth allowed for exceptional circumstances that most displaced children would never experience. He insisted that federal regulations existed to protect children from exploitation disguised as opportunity. He's not entirely wrong, Beckett admitted when the ranch gathered to discuss Vane's response. "This place is exceptional. Not every displaced child has access to this level of resources." "So we expand them," Lydia said. It was the idea she'd been developing for weeks, the logical extension of everything they'd built. "We don't keep this success to ourselves. We share it. We document everything. Our educational methods, management systems, training protocols. We create a model that other ranches, farms, and families can adopt. The Rowan method becomes bigger than just us." Maddie looked at her with something like awe. "You're talking about changing the entire child welfare system." "I'm talking about proving there's a better way." Institutions exist because people think they're the only option. We show them alternatives. That's ambitious, Sam observed. Maybe too ambitious. Probably, Clara agreed. But we're already under scrutiny from every direction. Might as well use that attention productively. The discussion stretched long into the night, with everyone contributing ideas, concerns, and possibilities. By dawn, they'd developed a framework. The Rowan Ranch would become a demonstration project, accepting additional displaced children on a trial basis. They'd document educational outcomes, health improvements, and social development. They'd create training materials for other families interested in similar arrangements. And they'd work with sympathetic legislators to draft policy reforms based on empirical evidence rather than bureaucratic assumptions. This could backfire spectacularly, Beckett warned. If we take in more children and anything goes wrong, Vane will use it as proof that the entire model is flawed. And if we don't try, Lydia countered, we're just 4 lucky girls who got saved. But if we succeed, we change what's possible for thousands of children. Marika and Beckett looked at each of them in turn. These 4 girls who'd been bought at auction 8 months ago, who'd transformed themselves and his ranch into something neither he nor they could have imagined. They were asking him to risk everything they'd built, and they were right to ask. All right, he said finally, we expand, but carefully. We start with 2 more children, carefully selected. We document everything, and we build systems that can survive our inevitable mistakes. Agreed? Agreed. The first 2 children arrived in May, brothers named Thomas and James Hutchinson, ages 10 and 12, whose father had died in a mining accident and whose mother had succumbed to pneumonia the following winter. They'd spent 4 months in a state orphanage in Topeka, and the experience had left them hollow-eyed and silent. The Marlowe sisters met them at the door, remembering exactly what it felt like to arrive at this ranch broken and afraid. Rose brought them to the kitchen where Maddie had prepared an enormous meal. Clara showed them the library and encouraged them to take any books they wanted. June introduced them to the horses, speaking quietly about how animals understood grief better than most people. And Lydia simply told them the truth. This place isn't perfect, and it won't fix everything. But you're safe here. You're wanted here. And if you're willing to work hard and trust us, you'll discover parts of yourself you didn't know existed. The boys settled in slowly, cautiously, testing boundaries and looking for the trap they were certain must exist. But weeks passed and the trap never sprung. Instead, they found routine, education, meaningful work, and people who saw their potential rather than their tragedy. Thomas discovered a gift for woodworking under the tutelage of the ranch carpenter. James, to everyone's surprise, proved to be a mathematical prodigy who could keep pace with Clara. They're thriving, Dr. Pratt observed during his quarterly visit in July. Heart rate's normal, weight gain appropriate, psychological indicators all positive. Whatever you're doing, it's working, but I have to ask, how do you plan to scale this? 6 children is manageable. 60 would be impossible. We're not scaling to 60, Lydia explained. We're creating a model that 60 other families can adopt. Every detail we document, every success we demonstrate becomes evidence that this approach works. Then we help other ranches, farms, and families implement similar systems. You're 17 years old and you're talking about restructuring child welfare policy? I'm 17 years old, and I was almost torn away from my sisters by people who cared more about regulations than reality. So yes, I'm talking about changing policy. Someone has to. Dr. Pratt shook his head in amazement. Beckett, you realize these girls are going to change the world, right? Or at least try to. I'm counting on it, Beckett replied. That's why I bought them. By August, the ranch had become something between a working cattle operation and a living laboratory for alternative child welfare. Delegations visited regularly, social reformers, legislators, journalists, academics, and skeptics all wanting to see this controversial experiment firsthand. Some came hoping to find failure that would justify their opposition. Instead, they found children learning advanced mathematics, training horses, performing music, and managing business operations with competence that surpassed many adults. The criticism didn't stop, but it changed character. Opponents could no longer claim the girls were suffering or being exploited. Instead, they argued about replicability, sustainability, and whether exceptional outcomes justified abandoning institutional safeguards. It was progress. in its way. The debate had shifted from whether the ranch should exist to how its methods might be adapted elsewhere. Then, in early September, Inspector Vane returned. He arrived without warning, accompanied by a federal marshal and 2 new deputies. But this time he came with different papers. Not removal orders, but official federal authorization to conduct a comprehensive evaluation. Someone in Washington had decided that the Rowan Ranch controversy needed to be resolved definitively. Mr. Rowan, Vane said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd finally gained the upper hand, I'm here to inform you that the Bureau of Child Welfare has been authorized to conduct a full assessment of this facility. We'll be conducting interviews, reviewing educational materials, examining financial records, and observing daily operations for a period of 2 weeks. At the end of that period, we'll submit recommendations to Congress regarding the future of this arrangement and whether it should be permitted to continue. 2 weeks? Maddie's face had gone pale. You're staying here for 2 weeks? We'll be lodging in Clearwater and visiting daily. Our assessment will be thorough, impartial, and final. I suggest you cooperate fully. Any obstruction will be noted in our report. Beckett's jaw clenched, but Lydia stepped forward before he could respond. In the 8 months since the auction, she'd grown not just in knowledge, but in presence. She faced Vane with the poise of someone who'd learned that fear and courage could coexist. Inspector Vane, we welcome your assessment. In fact, we'd like to propose something. Rather than simply observing us, why don't you participate? Work alongside the children you're evaluating. Help with the horses, review the business accounts, attend the educational sessions. See firsthand not just what we've accomplished, but how we've accomplished it. Vane's eyes narrowed. That would compromise objectivity. With respect, Inspector, observation without participation has already compromised your objectivity. You see us as subjects to be evaluated rather than people attempting something difficult and important. Spend 2 weeks actually engaging with what we do, and then make your judgment, unless you're afraid of what you might learn. The challenge hung in the air between them. Vane's deputies exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with this unexpected proposal. The federal marshal, an older man named Garrett, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. She's got a point, Vane. Hard to evaluate a working ranch from the outside. Might learn something useful if you got your hands dirty. Vane looked like he'd bitten into something sour. But refusing would make him appear cowardly or closed-minded, and his entire authority rested on the appearance of impartiality. Fine, he said finally. We'll participate in your daily operations as part of our assessment. But understand this. Any attempt to manipulate our findings will be immediately apparent and will result in the harshest possible recommendations. We wouldn't dream of it, Lydia replied. Welcome to the Rowan Ranch, Inspector. I think the next 2 weeks will be very educational for all of us. That night, as the household gathered to prepare for what everyone recognized as their final test, Beckett pulled Lydia aside. That was either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. I'm not sure which. Neither am I, Lydia admitted. But we couldn't just let them observe us like specimens in a jar. This way they'll see the work, feel the challenges, and understand why this matters. That's our best chance. And if it backfires, if they find something to condemn us with, then we fight, same as always. But at least we'll have tried everything. Beckett studied her for a long moment. You're not the scared 16-year-old I bought at auction anymore. No, Lydia agreed. I'm the 17-year-old business manager who's about to teach a federal inspector why bureaucracy will never beat determination. There's a difference. She walked away to help her sisters prepare for tomorrow, leaving Beckett standing in the gathering darkness, marveling at how 4 lost girls had somehow become an unstoppable force. The first morning of Inspector Vane's assessment began at 5:30, with the ranch bell clanging through the pre-dawn darkness. Lydia found the inspector and his deputies standing uncertainly in the yard, dressed in their city clothes, clearly unprepared for the reality of ranch work. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said brightly, handing each of them a tin cup of scalding coffee. "Breakfast is at 6, but the cattle don't wait for convenience. Mr. Rowan and Carlos are already checking the north pasture. I suggest you dress for actual work. Those suits won't survive an hour." Deputy Keyes looked at his polished shoes with dismay. "We're here to observe, not to labor. You agreed to participate, Inspector Vane. That means you work. Sam needs help mucking stables before the horses can be turned out. Thomas and James are repairing fence line in the east section, and I'll be in the office balancing last month's accounts if you'd like to review our financial management. Your choice. Vane's face had gone rigid, but he'd boxed himself into this corner and knew it. We'll start with the stables, assess the animal care protocols. June, who'd been listening from the porch, grinned wickedly. Perfect. Sam's been waiting for you. Fair warning, the horses know when people are uncomfortable around them. They tend to test boundaries. The next 2 hours were educational in ways Vane hadn't anticipated. Mucking stables was hard, filthy work that left the inspectors sweating and sore. Sam demonstrated proper technique while June moved through the stalls with casual efficiency, speaking to each horse in low tones that somehow communicated volumes. When Vane tried to lead a mare to the pasture, she planted her feet and refused to budge until June whispered something that made the horse suddenly compliant. "What did you tell her?" Vane demanded, frustrated and impressed in equal measure. "That you're scared but not cruel, and she should be patient with you. Horses appreciate honesty." June moved to the next stall. "Inspector, can I ask you something? When you look at us, do you see children who need saving or problems that need solving?" The question was so direct that Vane actually stopped working. "I see children who deserve proper care within established systems." "That's not an answer. That's a policy statement." June continued mucking her stall without looking at him. "I'm 8 years old. 8 months ago, men at an auction wanted to buy me separately from my sisters. Some of them had looks in their eyes that scared me worse than anything in my whole life. Then Mr. Rowan spent $20,000 to keep us together. So I'll ask again, do you see me as a child who was saved or as evidence that your systems failed?" Vane opened his mouth, closed it, and returned to his work without answering. But Lydia, watching from the stable entrance, saw something flicker across his face. Not agreement, but at least recognition that the question mattered. Breakfast was a chaotic affair with 15 people crowded around the kitchen table. The 4 Marlowe sisters, Thomas and James, Beckett, Maddie, Carlos, Sam, 3 ranch hands, and the 3 inspectors who looked distinctly out of place. Maddie served mountains of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy while conversation flowed in multiple directions at once. "Rose, did you finish the Mozart variations?" Clara asked, reaching for another biscuit. "Most of them. The 3rd variation is giving me trouble. The tempo shifts are tricky. Mrs. Pemberton suggested I slow down and focus on precision over speed." "Sound advice for more than music," Beckett observed. "Carlos, did we get confirmation on the Chicago cattle shipment?" "Si, jefe. They'll take 300 head at $22 each. Lydia, you'll need to adjust the accounts." "Already done. I projected the Chicago sale in last week's forecast. We're on track for a 38% profit increase this quarter." But Deputy Keyes, who'd been silently eating, suddenly spoke up. "You're 17 years old and you're managing financial projections that sophisticated?" "I'm 17 years old and I have excellent teachers. There's a difference between intelligence and opportunity. Most children have the former, not enough have the latter." Marshal Garrett, who'd been quietly observing everything, smiled into his coffee cup. After breakfast, Vane and his deputies split up to observe different aspects of the ranch operation. Deputy Morton followed Clara to her morning mathematics session with Maddie, where he watched a 12-year-old work through calculus problems that would challenge university students. Deputy Keyes accompanied Rose to her music lesson, where Mrs. Pemberton demonstrated exactly how far Rose had progressed in 8 months. When she arrived, she was rusty but competent, Mrs. Pemberton explained. Now, she's performing at a level I've only seen in students at major conservatories. Her technical skills are exceptional, but more importantly, she understands the emotional architecture of music. She doesn't just play notes, she tells stories. "And you believe this environment facilitates that growth?" Keyes asked. "I believe that removing her from her sisters would destroy the emotional security that allows her to take artistic risks. Music requires vulnerability. You can't be vulnerable when you're terrified." Mrs. Pemberton fixed Keyes with a stern look. "I've taught senators' daughters who had every material advantage and none of Rose's gift. Talent requires nurturing, Deputy. This ranch provides that. Your institutions could not." Inspector Vane spent the morning with Lydia in the ranch office, reviewing 8 months of meticulously maintained financial records. She walked him through every entry: income from cattle sales, expenses for feed and supplies, payroll for ranch hands, investments in equipment and infrastructure. She showed him the education budget, the household accounts, and the separate funds established for each child's future needs. You maintain individual savings accounts for all 6 children? Vane asked, studying the ledger. Of course. The goal isn't dependency, it's preparation for independence. Each child earns a modest salary for their work contributions, and Beckett matches their savings dollar for dollar. By the time they reach adulthood, they'll have capital to pursue education, start businesses, or establish themselves independently. That's what care means, preparing people to thrive, not just survive. Vane moved to the next page, then stopped. This entry shows a substantial charitable donation to the Topeka Children's Home. Why would you donate to an institution you're essentially opposing? We're not opposing institutions. We're offering alternatives. Some children need institutional structure. Others thrive in family environments. The goal should be matching children to situations where they'll succeed, not forcing everyone into identical systems. Lydia met his gaze steadily. Inspector, we're not claiming we have the only answer. We're proving there's more than one answer. That's the distinction your Bureau refuses to acknowledge. The Bureau exists to protect children. The Bureau exists to manage children. Protection and management aren't the same thing. She closed the ledger with quiet finality. You want to protect children? Give them food, education, safety, and people who see their potential. You want to manage children? Put them in institutions where they're safe but never truly free. We're offering the former. Your system provides the latter. The question is which one actually serves children's interests. Vane was quiet for a long moment. You're very articulate for someone so young. I'm very motivated. There's a difference. By midday, the inspectors regrouped to compare observations and were uniformly exhausted. Ranch work was harder than any of them had anticipated, and the children they'd come to evaluate were more complex, more capable, and more thoughtful than bureaucratic categories could capture. They're exceptional, Deputy Morton admitted over lunch. All of them. The question is whether these results are replicable. We have documentation for everything, Lydia said, producing a thick folder. Educational curricula, training protocols, management systems, financial structures. We've spent months creating materials that other families could adopt. The Rowan method isn't about Beckett's wealth. It's about intentional, individualized care. That can be replicated anywhere people are willing to invest time and attention. Marshal Garrett, who'd been largely silent throughout the morning, finally spoke up. Inspector Vane, I've been in law enforcement for 30 years. I've seen every kind of exploitation and abuse humans can inflict on each other. And I'm telling you plainly, what's happening here isn't exploitation. It's redemption. These children were being sold like livestock, and this man intervened. Yes, the situation is irregular. Yes, it challenges conventional approaches. But irregular isn't illegal, and unconventional isn't wrong. The marshal's personal opinions aren't relevant to our assessment, Vane began. My professional judgment is absolutely relevant. You asked me to accompany you to ensure legal propriety. I'm telling you there's no crime here. What I see is 6 children who've been given opportunities they'd never receive in institutional care, and who are using those opportunities to become extraordinary. If your recommendation to Congress is to shut this down, you're not protecting children. You're protecting bureaucracy. Vane's face had gone cold. Marshal Garrett, your role is to provide security, not policy recommendations. And your role is to ensure child welfare, not defend failed systems. Seems we're both overstepping our bounds. The tension shattered when June burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. Lydia, the mare is foaling. Sam says she's struggling and needs help. Everyone rushed to the stables where one of the ranch's pregnant mares was indeed in difficult labor. Sam was already there, his hands bloody, his face tense with concentration. Beckett arrived seconds later, taking immediate control. Breech position, Sam reported tersely. Foal's stuck. I can't get the angle right. Let me try, June said, pushing forward. Absolutely not. You're too small. That's exactly why I can help. My hands are smaller. I can reach where you can't. She looked at Beckett with absolute certainty. Trust me, please. Beckett hesitated for only a second. Talk her through it, Sam. Every step. What followed was 30 minutes of tense, delicate work. June, guided by Sam's instructions, carefully manipulated the foal's position inside the birth canal while the mare huffed and stamped in pain. Her small hands, so perfect for piano keys and mathematical equations, proved equally suited for veterinary work. She worked with absolute focus, ignoring the blood and fluids, attending only to the life that needed help. "Almost there," she murmured, more to the mare than anyone else. "You're doing great, Mama. Just a little more. That's it. Good girl." With a final push from the mare and careful guidance from June, the foal slipped free in a rush of fluids and membrane. It lay still for a terrible moment, then shuddered and drew its first breath. The mare nickered softly and began cleaning her baby with long, tender strokes of her tongue. The stable erupted in relieved cheers. Sam grabbed June and lifted her high despite her protests. Beckett smiled wider than anyone had seen in years, and the inspectors, covered in stable dust and straw, stood witnessing something their reports would never adequately capture: a child using knowledge earned through patient teaching to preserve life that might otherwise have been lost. "That," Marshall Garrett said quietly to Vane, "is what happens when you invest in children instead of warehousing them." The rest of the 2-week assessment followed similar patterns. The inspectors worked alongside the household, observing not just outcomes but processes. They saw Clara teaching Thomas advanced mathematics, demonstrating that learning was a communal activity rather than individual achievement. They heard Rose perform at a community gathering in Clearwater, where townspeople who'd once gossiped about the scandal now applauded with genuine pride. They watched James discover a gift for carpentry under patient instruction, building furniture that would furnish the expanding ranch house. Most importantly, they saw how the household functioned as a unit. Maddie managing domestic operations with military precision, Carlos coordinating ranch hands and cattle operations, Sam overseeing horse breeding and training programs that were attracting attention from across the Midwest, and Beckett, the gruff cattle baron who'd started all this, learning alongside everyone else that family could be chosen rather than inherited. One evening near the end of the assessment period, Vane found himself alone in the library with Lydia. She was working on correspondence with other ranches interested in adopting the Rowan method, while he reviewed his accumulated notes. "Miss Marlowe," he said finally, "I owe you an apology." Lydia looked up, genuinely surprised. "For what?" "For seeing you as a problem rather than a person. When I first came here, I saw 4 girls in an irregular situation that violated federal protocols. I didn't see 4 human beings who'd been rescued from genuine horror and given a chance to discover who they could become. And now? Now I see the horror was almost losing you to my own bureaucratic certainty. You were right. Protection and management aren't the same thing. I've spent my career managing children in the name of protecting them. But management creates compliance, not capability. You're proof of what happens when protection actually means empowerment." Lydia set down her pen. "Inspector Vane, we're not asking you to abandon institutions or regulations. We're asking you to acknowledge that one size doesn't fit all. Some children need structured institutional environments. Others need family-style care with individual attention. The tragedy isn't that institutions exist, it's that we've made them the only option. What you're proposing would require completely restructuring federal child welfare policy." "Yes, it would. Is that a reason not to do it?" Vane smiled tiredly. "You're 17 and you're proposing policy reform that congressional committees have been debating for decades. I'm 17 and I was almost torn from my sisters by policies written by people who never met us. That gives me perspective that congressional committees lack." The final day of the assessment arrived with October frost painting the prairie silver. The inspectors gathered their notes, completed their interviews, and prepared to return to Washington with their findings. The entire household assembled in the yard to see them off, and the atmosphere was tense with waiting. Inspector Vane stood on the porch, his leather folder under his arm, and addressed them all. "Over the past 2 weeks, my colleagues and I have observed operations here at the Rowan Ranch. We've reviewed financial records, educational materials, health assessments, and daily routines. We've interviewed every resident and many community members, and we've participated directly in the work that makes this place function." He paused, and Lydia felt her sister's hands find hers. "Our findings will state the following. The Rowan Ranch represents an innovative approach to child welfare that achieves exceptional outcomes through individualized care, adequate resources, and genuine commitment to each child's development. The 6 children currently in residence demonstrate measurably superior health, education, and psychological well-being compared to institutional averages. The management systems are sophisticated and replicable, and the model deserves serious consideration as an alternative to conventional institutional care. Maddie gasped. Rose started crying. Clara grabbed June and hugged her fiercely, and Beckett, standing tall and quiet, simply nodded once. However, Vane continued, and everyone tensed again, we will also recommend significant oversight, quarterly health assessments by independent physicians, annual educational evaluations by state authorities, financial audits to ensure no exploitation, and ongoing monitoring to verify that outcomes remain consistently positive. This model works here, now, with these specific people. Whether it can be successfully replicated elsewhere remains to be proven. That's fair, Beckett said. We welcome oversight that's actually about child welfare rather than bureaucratic control. Additionally, Vane said, and now he looked directly at Lydia, we will recommend that Congress establish a pilot program based on the Rowan method. 5 additional ranches or farms will be selected to implement similar approaches under federal supervision. If outcomes match what we've observed here, the program will expand. If not, it will be discontinued. But the experiment deserves a chance. You're recommending we become a national model? Lydia could barely believe what she was hearing. I'm recommending that rigid systems that prioritize management over welfare be challenged by empirical evidence. You've provided that evidence. What Congress does with it remains to be seen. Marshall Garrett stepped forward, extending his hand to Beckett. Mr. Rowan, it's been an education. You've built something remarkable here. Don't let anyone take it from you. I don't intend to. But we also can't keep it to ourselves. If this model can help other children, we're obligated to share it. After the inspectors departed, the household stood together in the yard, too stunned to move. They'd survived. More than survived. They'd apparently convinced the federal government to consider fundamentally changing its approach to child welfare. Did that really just happen? Rose whispered. I think so, Clara answered, though I'm still calculating the probability that we didn't imagine it. We didn't imagine it, Maddie said firmly. We earned it. Every early morning, every late night, every moment you children pushed yourselves to prove you were worth saving, it led to this. We were always worth saving, June said quietly. We just needed someone to see it. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Vane's report to Congress sparked national debate, with newspapers taking passionate positions on both sides. Social reformers championed the Rowan method as progressive innovation. Traditional child welfare advocates condemned it as dangerous sentimentality. Politicians used it to advance their own agendas, often having nothing to do with actual child welfare. But beneath the political theater, something real was happening. Families across the country began reaching out, asking how they could adopt the model. Ranchers, farmers, and even urban families wanted to provide homes for displaced children using individualized care rather than institutional placement. The demand was so overwhelming that Lydia, now 18 and legally an adult, established the Rowan Foundation to manage training, resources, and support for families interested in alternative child welfare. You're doing my job, Beckett told her one evening as she worked late in the office, drafting guidelines for the Foundation's second year of operations. I'm doing the job that needs doing. There's a difference. She looked up from her papers. Beckett, do you ever regret it? Buying 4 strange girls at auction and upending your entire life? He considered this seriously. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that a society exists where children can be sold like cattle. But regret what I did? Never. You 4 gave me a reason to live again. That's worth any amount of money or trouble. We gave each other reasons to live. That's how families work, even the ones we choose. Rose's music career blossomed beyond anyone's expectations. By 19, she was performing with symphony orchestras in Chicago and New York, while maintaining her home base at the ranch. She never accepted positions that would require permanent relocation, choosing instead to bring sophisticated culture back to Kansas rather than abandoning it for coastal cities. Her recordings sold thousands of copies, and the income went directly into the Rowan Foundation, funding music education for displaced children across the country. Clara's mathematical genius earned her admission to 3 prestigious universities by age 15. She declined all of them, instead completing her undergraduate work through correspondence while remaining at the ranch. At 17, she published her first academic book on applied mathematics and agriculture, revolutionizing farming practices across the Midwest. At 20, she became the youngest person ever awarded a doctorate in mathematics from Kansas State. And through it all, she never left her sisters or the place that had given her space to grow. June's reputation as a horse trainer became legendary. By 16, she was consulting with military cavalry programs on humane training methods. By 20, she'd established the first veterinary practice in Kansas run by a woman, specializing in equine medicine. She developed techniques for treating traumatized animals that were eventually adapted for treating traumatized humans, creating bridges between veterinary and psychiatric medicine that wouldn't become mainstream for decades. Thomas and James Hutchinson, the first expansion children, grew into accomplished men who never forgot where they'd come from. Thomas became a master carpenter whose furniture graced homes across 3 states, while James worked alongside Clara developing mathematical models for architectural engineering. Both married, raised families, and hosted displaced children in their own homes, extending the Rowan method into a second generation. The pilot program Inspector Vane had recommended expanded beyond anyone's initial projections. Within 5 years, 20 ranches and farms across the country had adopted the model. Within 10 years, family-style care became a recognized alternative to institutional placement, with federal funding supporting families willing to provide individualized attention to displaced children. The success rates were undeniable: higher educational attainment, better health outcomes, lower rates of adult poverty and incarceration. The evidence mounted until even the most skeptical critics had to acknowledge that the Rowan method worked. Inspector Vane, to his credit, became one of the model's strongest advocates. He spent his remaining years in federal service pushing for policies that prioritized child outcomes over institutional convenience. Before his retirement, he wrote a memoir titled What I Learned from 4 Sisters, acknowledging his initial errors and celebrating the transformation that resulted from being willing to change his mind. 25 years after that October morning, when 4 frightened girls stood on an auction block in Clearwater, Kansas, Dr. Lydia Marlowe Rowan stood before the United States Congress preparing to witness history. She'd married a lawyer named Jonathan Rowan, distant cousin to Beckett, and together they'd expanded the foundation to serve thousands of children annually. But today wasn't about the foundation's work. Today was about making that work permanent national policy. The Child Empowerment and Protection Act had taken years to draft, longer to shepherd through congressional committees, and required compromises that sometimes frustrated Lydia's idealistic younger colleagues. But the core principle remained intact. Children deserved opportunities, not just management. Families who could provide individualized care deserved support, not suspicion. And federal policy should serve children's well-being rather than bureaucratic convenience. The vote was called just after noon. Lydia sat in the gallery flanked by her 3 sisters, Rose, now a renowned composer and performer, Clara, leading mathematician and agricultural scientist, and June, pioneering veterinarian and animal behaviorist. Beckett sat behind them, white-haired and weathered, but still radiating the fierce determination that had started everything 25 years ago. Maddie had passed 2 years earlier, but her legacy lived in every child whose life had been transformed by the model she'd helped build. The tally was unanimous. Every single representative voted for the Child Empowerment and Protection Act, making it law that family-style care would be federally funded and supported as an equal alternative to institutional placement, that displaced children would be matched to environments where they could thrive rather than processed through identical systems. That potential mattered as much as protection. The gallery erupted in applause. Lydia felt tears streaming down her face while her sisters embraced her. Strangers who'd fought alongside them for years clasped hands and celebrated. And somewhere in the chaos, a journalist asked her how it felt to have changed American child welfare policy. "I didn't change it," Lydia answered. 4 scared girls and 1 grieving man who refused to look away changed it. I just wrote it down so others could follow. After the ceremony, after the celebrations and photographs and speeches, the 5 of them, Lydia, Rose, Clara, June, and Beckett, stood together on the Capitol steps watching the sun set over Washington. They'd come so far from that terrible October day in Clearwater, Kansas, so far from the auction block and the terror of being torn apart, so far from being powerless children at the mercy of systems that saw them as problems rather than people. "Do you ever think about that day?" Rose asked quietly. "The auction?" Every day, Clara admitted. And I'm grateful for it. Grateful? June looked at her in surprise. Grateful that we learned early what most people never learn, that systems are made by humans, and what humans make, humans can change. If we'd been raised in comfort, we might never have understood that. We might have accepted the world as it was, rather than fighting for what it should be. That's a very mathematical way to view trauma, Lydia observed with a smile. Trauma teaches lessons. Whether those lessons destroy us or refine us is the choice we make. Beckett, who'd been silent, finally spoke. 25 years ago, I spent $20,000 on 4 girls at an auction. It was either the stupidest or smartest thing I'd ever done. I'm still not sure which. It was both, Lydia said. Most meaningful actions are. But I know this, you didn't just save 4 girls that day. You saved the man you'd become after losing your daughter. You needed us as much as we needed you. That's what family means. I bought you at auction, Lydia. I don't know if that counts as family. You bought us freedom from being separated. You provided us opportunities to become who we were meant to be. You treated us with dignity when the world saw us as disposable. That's more than biology ever guaranteed. So yes, that counts as family. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Around them, the nation's capital hummed with political machinery and human ambition. But for this moment, 5 people stood together, knowing they'd accomplished something that would outlast them all. They'd proven that compassion could be systematic, that care could be structured, and that seeing children as investments in humanity's future, rather than problems to be managed, would yield returns no ledger could calculate. What happens next? June asked. The law's passed, the model's established. Is our work done? The work is never done, Lydia answered. There will always be children who need help, systems that need changing, people who need reminding that potential exists everywhere if we're willing to invest in it. But that's okay. Meaningful work isn't supposed to end. It's supposed to matter. They descended the Capitol steps together, 5 people bound not by blood, but by shared experience and chosen commitment. Behind them, carved in marble and enshrined in law, was the evidence that 4 orphaned girls and 1 grieving man had changed what America believed possible. Ahead of them lay whatever challenges the future held, to be faced with the same determination that had carried them from an auction block to the halls of Congress. The story that had begun with a single desperate bid in a dusty Kansas town square had transformed into national policy that would protect and empower thousands of children across generations. And at its heart remained a simple truth that every person in that original household had learned and lived, that children aren't problems to be solved or assets to be managed, but human beings with infinite potential waiting for someone to believe in them enough to invest time, resources, and genuine care in helping them discover who they might become. That night, as Lydia prepared to return to Kansas with her family, she stood at her hotel window overlooking the city. 25 years ago, she'd stood at another window in Silas's attic, watching dawn break over a day that would change everything. Then she'd prayed for death rather than face separation from her sisters. Now she'd just witnessed the passage of federal legislation inspired directly by their story. The trajectory from despair to triumph wasn't a straight line. It involved years of hard work, countless setbacks, and moments when failure seemed inevitable. But the 4 Marlowe sisters had learned something crucial on that ranch in Kansas, that being saved was just the beginning. The real work was becoming people worth saving, not because they needed redemption, but because they deserved the opportunity to discover their own extraordinary potential. And in discovering their own potential, they'd help thousands of other children discover theirs. That was the true legacy of the Rowan method, the enduring gift of Beckett's impossible bid. He hadn't just purchased 4 girls from an auction. He'd invested in the radical possibility that care, when offered with genuine commitment and adequate resources, could transform not just individual lives, but entire systems. The lights of Washington glittered below her like stars fallen to earth. Somewhere in this city, policies were being written that would change children's lives. Somewhere in Kansas, the Rowan Ranch continued its work, now in its 2nd generation of leadership. And somewhere across America, families were choosing to open their homes and hearts to displaced children, proving every day that the best social safety net wasn't an institution, but a community of people willing to care. Lydia smiled, whispered a prayer of thanks for the parents she'd lost and the father she'd found, and turned away from the window. Tomorrow she'd return home to continue the work that would occupy the rest of her life. But tonight, she'd celebrate victory hard-won and well-earned. The story of four sisters who'd refused to be separated, who'd transformed personal tragedy into national reform, was complete. But the stories of the thousands of children who'd benefit from what they'd built were just beginning. And that, Lydia knew, was exactly how it should be. One impossible act of courage replicated across a nation, creating ripples that would spread through generations. One cattle baron who'd seen children as worth saving when a society saw them as disposable. Four sisters who'd proven that potential, given opportunity, could overcome any obstacle. That was the story carved into law, written in lives transformed, and carried forward by everyone who understood a simple truth: that children aren't investments requiring careful management, but human beings deserving radical belief in their capacity to become extraordinary. And sometimes, just sometimes, all it takes to change the world is one person willing to look at tragedy and say, "Not today, not these children, not on my watch." Beckett Rowan had said that 25 years ago with a single bid that shocked an entire town. And four sisters, given that chance, had spent the rest of their lives proving he'd been right to believe. The end of their story was really just the beginning of countless others. And that, more than any legislation or recognition, was the victory that mattered most.